The longest night of the year arrives quietly. There is no announcement, no sound, no visible shift in the sky that tells you it has begun. The world simply grows darker a little earlier than the day before, and the cold settles in a little deeper. Most people pass through it without noticing. Lights turn on automatically. Rooms stay warm. Calendars already promise that brighter days are coming. But for most of human history, this night was not ordinary at all. It was frightening. It was uncertain. And for many, it felt like the edge of existence itself. Imagine standing thousands of years ago, long before cities, before electricity, before written memory. The sun has been sinking lower each day, its warmth weakening, its presence shorter. The nights stretch longer, colder, heavier. Food is scarce. Animals have vanished. Children cry from hunger. Elders grow quieter. And somewhere deep inside the human mind, a terrible question begins to form, not in words, but in feeling: what if the sun does not come back? This fear was not symbolic. It was not poetic. It was practical. Without the sun, nothing grows. Without growth, there is no food. Without food, there is no future. Every winter carried the possibility that the world had finally begun to die. And when the longest night arrived, when darkness seemed to claim more time than light itself, people watched the horizon with a mixture of hope and dread, unsure whether dawn was a promise or a memory. Today, we call this time Christmas season. We fill it with music, decorations, obligations, and noise. We celebrate without remembering why celebration existed in the first place. The ancient fear beneath the lights has been buried so deeply that it feels irrelevant. Yet that fear shaped us. It shaped our rituals, our stories, our understanding of life and death. And it shaped something even more fundamental: our relationship with darkness. For early humans, darkness was not just the absence of light. It was a presence. It hid predators. It froze the land. It swallowed paths and erased certainty. Darkness was when things went wrong. Injuries became fatal. Fires failed. Sounds in the distance carried threat instead of comfort. And in winter, darkness felt endless. The longest night was the peak of that feeling. It was the moment when the balance tipped as far as it could possibly go. Light had been losing ground for months, retreating day by day, and now it seemed nearly defeated. The sun rose late, weak and low, barely warming the skin before sinking again. People counted hours not by clocks, but by fear. Fear of starvation. Fear of illness. Fear that something fundamental had broken in the world. What makes this moment so powerful is not just the danger, but the uncertainty. Ancient people did not know what we know now. They did not have equations, orbital mechanics, or calendars guaranteeing that the cycle would reverse. They had memory, observation, and hope. Some winters were worse than others. Some years, people did not survive. Patterns existed, but certainty did not. Each solstice was a test of faith in reality itself. And so, the longest night became more than a point in time. It became a psychological threshold. A moment when humanity had to decide whether existence was trustworthy. Whether the world was governed by cycles or chaos. Whether endurance meant anything at all. This is where the story truly begins. Not with celebration, but with waiting. With watching the horizon in silence. With listening to the wind outside fragile shelters. With families huddled close, conserving warmth, conserving hope. In those moments, the future was not imagined as progress or achievement. It was imagined as survival until morning. Fire burned constantly, not just for warmth, but for reassurance. Its flickering light pushed back the darkness just enough to make it tolerable. Shadows danced on cave walls, not as entertainment, but as proof that light still existed. Stories were told, not to pass time, but to anchor the mind, to remind people who they were and why they were still here. The longest night forced humanity inward. Physically, socially, psychologically. There was nowhere to go. Nothing to do but endure. And in that endurance, something remarkable happened. Humans began to notice that even at the darkest point, something subtle shifted. The sun did return. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. A minute longer of light. Then another. So small it could be missed, yet profound enough to change everything. But that realization did not come instantly. It came through generations of watching, remembering, and comparing. Through elders who survived enough winters to sense the pattern. Through shared memory passed orally, fragile but persistent. Through the gradual understanding that darkness had a limit. Still, each year, the fear returned. Knowledge reduced uncertainty, but it did not erase vulnerability. Winter remained dangerous. The solstice remained tense. The sun's return was not celebrated because it was guaranteed, but because it was earned. Survived. Witnessed after hardship. This is why the longest night mattered. Not because it was beautiful, but because it demanded courage without reward. It asked people to continue without reassurance. To sit with discomfort, hunger, and doubt. To trust that something unseen was still moving beneath the surface of reality. In modern life, we rarely experience this kind of waiting. Discomfort is temporary. Light is constant. Seasons are inconveniences rather than threats. And because of that, the solstice has lost its emotional weight. It has been turned into decoration rather than confrontation. Yet the human nervous system still remembers. Winter still slows us down. Darkness still makes us reflective. Many people feel a quiet heaviness during this time, a pull toward introspection they cannot fully explain. Depression rates rise. Sleep changes. Old memories surface. Something ancient stirs beneath the surface, even if we no longer have language for it. The longest night once forced humanity to confront impermanence. It reminded them that life could vanish. That warmth could fail. That nothing was guaranteed. And in doing so, it gave meaning to survival itself. To see the sun rise after the solstice was not just relief. It was renewal. Proof that endurance mattered. This is the deeper origin of what we now call rebirth. Not as a metaphor, but as an experience. Rebirth did not begin with joy. It began with fear that had been faced and survived. Light felt precious because darkness had been overwhelming. Warmth felt sacred because cold had been merciless. When we rush past this moment today, when we treat it as background noise to celebration, we lose something subtle but important. We lose the understanding that hope is not loud. It is quiet. Gradual. Almost invisible at first. Like the sun after the longest night, it does not return in triumph. It returns in inches. The ancestors who lived through this did not need fireworks or songs to mark the solstice. The fact that the world continued was enough. The fact that dawn still came was a miracle they could feel in their bones. And perhaps that is what the longest night still offers us, if we are willing to notice it. Not a reason to celebrate, but a reason to pause. To acknowledge darkness without fleeing from it. To sit with uncertainty without demanding answers. To trust that change can be happening even when nothing appears different. The longest night is not just behind us in history. It lives inside us. In every period of doubt. Every season of waiting. Every moment when progress feels stalled and the future feels cold. And just as it did for those who came before us, it asks the same quiet question: can you endure long enough to notice when the light begins to return? That question, more than any tradition or holiday, is where this story truly begins. Long before clocks, calendars, and the orderly division of time, humans experienced the passing of days and seasons as something immediate, urgent, and profoundly alive. Time was not a concept but a force, measured by hunger, by the movement of the sun across the sky, by the subtle shifts of weather, and by the rhythms of life and death surrounding them. Every sunrise and sunset carried consequences. Every month, every season, was an intimate matter of survival. To know when the sun would rise or set, when the river would freeze, or when the herds would migrate was not curiosity or leisure. It was necessity. Without that knowledge, there was danger. Without observation, there was no tomorrow. Humanity's earliest relationship with time was raw and deeply intertwined with fear, hope, and the pressing need to endure. In the midst of harsh winters, the concept of the solstice emerged naturally from this need. Long before numbers, people noticed patterns. They noticed that the days were shrinking, that the sun's path along the horizon was lower, that the cold was becoming relentless. These were not abstract observations, they were lived experiences. Each night longer than the last brought palpable tension. The body instinctively recognized the threat of darkness. Food supplies diminished, water sources froze, and predators prowled closer to settlements. Winter was a test of knowledge as much as it was a test of endurance. To survive, humans had to become acute observers of their environment, chroniclers of patterns without writing. Memory became a tool as vital as fire, storing repeated cycles in collective understanding. Yet knowing was not the same as certainty. Even with careful observation, the harshness of winter defied prediction. Some seasons were crueler than others. A river might freeze earlier, a storm might bury supplies under snow, or game might migrate away unexpectedly. The solstice marked a peak in uncertainty, a single day when humanity stood on the edge of the known world and the unknown. It was the moment when observation, memory, and hope converged in quiet, tense anticipation. Ancient people did not know precisely how the sun moved or why the seasons changed, they knew only what they could see and experience, and even that knowledge was limited by life itself. Every year, the solstice was both familiar and dangerous, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed, that each winter could be the last. During this time, human cognition began to evolve in response to necessity. Patterns in the sky became language, even before words. The horizon, the phases of the moon, and the subtle shifts in the sun's trajectory were recorded mentally and communally. People passed knowledge down orally, through story, song, and ritual. Each generation learned to anticipate the slow return of light, not through science as we understand it, but through careful, repeated observation over decades. The long winters required cooperation, attention, and shared memory. Communities relied on elders whose experience allowed them to predict subtle changes in the environment. These elders were the living calendars, the ones whose minds held the rhythm of the natural world, connecting the immediate present with the promise of survival ahead. The solstice, the point at which the sun seemed to stand still before beginning its slow return, became a fulcrum of human perception of time. It was a moment that crystallized months of observation into a single, profoundly meaningful experience. Life before calendars was cyclical and relational. Days were long or short, but their significance was measured by the pressures of survival, the ability to hunt, gather, keep warm, and protect the young. The solstice became a mental checkpoint, the moment when fear began to ease into cautious hope. When the sun's apparent pause in the sky was recognized, it was not merely an astronomical observation. It was a psychological reassurance that the cycles of life were continuing, that the dangerous descent into winter's darkness would not be permanent. It was the first hint that human understanding could intervene, through awareness and preparation, in the chaotic rhythms of nature. In these early societies, the solstice also began to shape social organization. Knowledge of the sun's return gave structure to the long nights. People gathered, shared resources, and reinforced bonds of kinship and cooperation. Storytelling, ritual, and communal observation were not cultural embellishments, they were survival strategies. By marking the passage of time together, humans reinforced their collective resilience. The longest night was not endured alone. It was observed, anticipated, and survived as a community. Every person who remembered patterns, shared them, or acted on them contributed to the survival of the group. In this way, the solstice became a mechanism not only for understanding the external world but for organizing the internal social world. Time, fear, hope, and community fused into a single lived experience. The recognition of cycles also began to shape the human imagination. As early people witnessed the slow retreat of light, they developed stories, metaphors, and rituals to embody these experiences. The sun, which seemed to vanish only to return, became more than a celestial body. It became a symbol of continuity, a representation of endurance and trust in the unseen forces of life. Patterns in the sky mirrored patterns in the human experience: birth and death, hunger and abundance, darkness and light. The solstice, once a practical marker, became deeply symbolic. Humans were discovering that survival required not only physical action but psychological understanding. To endure the winter, to face the longest night, they had to hold both fear and hope simultaneously. They had to believe that life continued even when all visible signs suggested otherwise. Time, then, was not a neutral measure. It was an intimate force, pressing upon the body and the mind. It shaped behavior, memory, and expectation. The solstice was the sharpest inflection point in this lived experience, the day when time itself seemed to slow and stretch. Ancient humans developed ways to measure it, to mark it, to ritualize it, and to pass the knowledge forward. Their tools were simple: firelight, oral memory, communal observation, yet they carried profound meaning. Each solstice reinforced the human understanding that the future was fragile, that survival required attention and collaboration, and that the cycles of the natural world were both a threat and a guide. It is in this context that the solstice emerges as humanity's first conscious confrontation with uncertainty. Before science, before calendars, before organized religion, humans understood that existence was conditional, dependent upon forces beyond immediate control. And in this understanding, they found the roots of what we now call ritual, reflection, and philosophy. The solstice was the first point at which humans paused to observe not only the world outside but the world within, to measure their place in time, to acknowledge the fragility and persistence of life. The cold, darkness, and threat of winter were transformed into something more than survival challenges. They became the foundation for understanding continuity, memory, and hope. In the quiet observation of the sun's slow return, early humans discovered something remarkable. They discovered that time could be endured. That cycles could be trusted. That continuity existed, even if invisible. They discovered that survival was not merely physical but mental, emotional, and communal. The solstice, once a moment of fear, became a symbol of resilience. The darkest day was also a turning point, a point where preparation, observation, and shared understanding created the possibility of renewal. And in that realization, humanity took one of its first conscious steps beyond mere existence, toward reflection, ritual, and meaning. By embedding themselves in the cycles of the natural world, humans learned patience, observation, and the quiet power of endurance. They began to see time not merely as a relentless adversary but as a rhythm to be understood, respected, and sometimes celebrated. Survival required more than physical skill; it required attention to the subtle flow of the world, to the patterns that hinted at continuity, and to the knowledge that light would return, even after the longest night. The longest nights, then, were not only a trial of physical endurance but a crucible for consciousness itself. By watching the sun, the moon, the horizon, and each subtle change in season, humans learned to measure life, to anticipate it, and to honor it. They learned that time could be both terrifying and reassuring, both threatening and sustaining. And in that understanding, the very concept of human wisdom began to form, grounded not in abstract thought but in lived, attentive experience, at the edge of darkness, waiting for the light to return. Fire has always been more than a tool. In the depths of winter, when the sun itself seems weak and distant, fire becomes the axis around which human life revolves. It is not just warmth, though warmth is essential. It is not just light, though light drives back the shadows that stalk the night. Fire is reassurance. Fire is presence. Fire is proof that survival is possible even when the world beyond the cave is indifferent and dangerous. In the long nights of early humans, fire was the first technology not merely of convenience, but of emotional survival. To tend a flame was to assert existence against the vast, cold, and incomprehensible dark. Imagine the deepest winter night. Outside, snow drifts silently over the frozen ground, while the wind whistles through barren trees. Predators lurk at the edges of vision. Within a shelter of stone or wood, humans gather around a fire, its orange glow reflecting off rough walls. Every crackle and pop is a reminder that life persists. The flames do more than illuminate, they animate. Shadows dance across faces, creating moving stories on the walls of the cave. These flickering images become more than entertainment, they are mirrors of the inner mind, reflections of fear, hope, and imagination. In the absence of formal writing or art, the fire itself becomes a canvas, and the night itself becomes a medium of expression. The first rituals emerge here. They are not yet codified ceremonies or religious observances, they are instinctive acts to manage uncertainty and fear. Humans begin to move in patterns around the flame, to speak in measured tones, to chant or sing, to mimic the movement of animals. They tell stories about hunts, about survival, about the world beyond the cave, about ancestors who faced darkness and returned. Each narrative is a lifeline, a reinforcement of shared knowledge and communal endurance. Stories transmitted across generations become survival tools, encoding lessons about which foods are safe, which paths are dangerous, which weather patterns herald a shift in the seasons. Fire holds these stories in its glow, giving them a living presence that the cold world outside cannot erase. Beyond the practical, fire becomes a symbol of psychological resilience. Darkness, which once signaled threat, becomes a space to be navigated rather than feared. By gathering, by tending, by observing the behavior of flames, humans cultivate patience, focus, and community cohesion. There is a subtle rhythm to this activity. Fuel is added just as embers begin to die, logs are shifted to maintain heat, and smoke is carefully managed to preserve air quality while keeping the fire alive. Each action is deliberate, a quiet choreography that reflects attentiveness to life itself. The rhythm of fire mirrors the rhythms of the natural world, inhale and exhale, night and day, winter and spring. In tending fire, humans align themselves with the universe's patterns, asserting a fragile but powerful control over what would otherwise be chaos. In many ways, fire also becomes a teacher. Its behavior is unpredictable yet governed by consistent principles. Flames can die suddenly, embers can flare unexpectedly. To survive, humans must learn to read these signals, to anticipate the shifts, to respond with speed and skill. This cultivates a deep form of attentiveness, an early form of mindfulness long before the term existed. In the flicker of light, humans learn to balance caution and trust, risk and patience. In the process, fire transforms the night from a threat into a space of observation and reflection. It is the first environment where human minds can explore abstract thought, because the immediate demands of survival are mitigated, at least temporarily, by the flame. The development of ritual around fire is not merely practical, it is deeply emotional. Across millennia, humans discover that their own presence, combined with the fire, produces a sense of safety that transcends the physical. They invent sequences, patterns of movement, songs, and chants that calm anxiety and reinforce connection. The act of tending fire becomes meditative, even sacred. It is a rehearsal of endurance, a symbolic confrontation with the darkness that surrounds them. Fire allows humans to externalize their inner states of fear and hope, to project them onto the shadows and shapes dancing across the walls. In doing so, they create the first bridges between mind and world, between inner experience and outer environment. These rituals are also profoundly social. Fire requires cooperation. Someone must gather fuel, someone must feed it, someone must maintain its structure. Tasks are distributed, and in this distribution, trust is cultivated. The flame becomes a communal responsibility, an anchor around which social hierarchies, roles, and bonds form. The longer the night, the more critical these relationships become. Each person's attention and action have a direct impact on the survival of the group. This shared labor around fire, born out of necessity, evolves into a form of social glue. It teaches early humans to collaborate, to observe others carefully, to communicate needs and warnings effectively, and to celebrate small successes when the fire is maintained through the night. Fire also mediates the perception of time. In the absence of clocks, it becomes a subtle indicator of passage. Sparks fade and reignite. Logs collapse into glowing embers. Smoke shifts with the wind. These changes offer a tangible sense of progression during the long hours of darkness. In attending to the fire, humans experience a controlled environment where change can be observed, predicted, and influenced. The unpredictability of the natural world outside the cave is mirrored in the behavior of the flames, allowing humans to practice response and adaptation in a microcosm. In this way, fire becomes both a tool for survival and a medium for understanding the world's inherent uncertainty. Through the presence of fire, humans also cultivate memory and imagination. The flickering light encourages reflection on past events, the successes and failures of previous hunts, the loss and survival of ancestors. At the same time, it allows for the creation of imagined worlds, stories of other places, of unseen dangers, of divine or animal spirits that govern life. These narratives, shaped by the interplay of light and shadow, form the foundation for myth, ritual, and early spiritual understanding. Fire gives imagination a stage, transforming survival into meaning. Humans begin to see themselves not only as physical beings navigating immediate threats but as participants in a larger, unfolding story that transcends individual experience. By observing the fire, humans also begin to understand causality in subtle ways. A spark ignites a log, which produces heat, smoke indicates changes in oxygen and direction, coals glow before flames emerge. These lessons are immediate, practical, and profound. They teach attentiveness, patience, and the ability to anticipate consequences. They also teach humility. Fire cannot be fully controlled. It demands respect. Its warmth can save life, but neglect or arrogance can destroy it. In this dynamic, humans learn to navigate power and vulnerability simultaneously, lessons that extend far beyond the fire into the wider world. Perhaps most importantly, fire during the longest night becomes a symbol of endurance itself. It represents the human capacity to persist against overwhelming odds. Darkness is immense, cold is relentless, and yet the flame survives. Its light is fragile but persistent, a tangible manifestation of the promise that the world continues even when threatened. Humans project themselves onto the fire, seeing their own struggles mirrored in its survival. To maintain a fire is to affirm life, to assert that the longest night will be endured, and that the sun, though invisible, will return. In this way, fire is not merely a survival tool, it is the first medium of human emotional and spiritual practice. Rituals around fire, storytelling, song, movement, observation, teach skills, foster community, cultivate patience, and create meaning in the face of existential uncertainty. They transform fear into action, darkness into a space for reflection, and threat into opportunity for psychological growth. Fire allows humans to witness, to endure, and to imagine. It bridges the external world of danger and the internal world of thought, giving rise to the first moments in which humans can confront uncertainty, create shared culture, and perceive the cyclical patterns that structure both nature and human life. Through fire, humanity begins to claim agency in the face of chaos. It becomes the first arena of ritual, the first stage for imagination, and the first crucible in which survival becomes intertwined with consciousness. The fire burns on, and with it burns the first flickering understanding that endurance, attention, and shared presence can transform fear into hope, darkness into insight, and the longest night into a space where humans discover the earliest forms of resilience, ritual, and inner life. Long before telescopes, calendars, or written records, the sky itself was humanity's earliest teacher. Every movement of the sun, every subtle shift in the stars, and every changing phase of the moon carried significance far beyond mere decoration. Ancient people did not look up at the heavens simply for wonder, they looked up because survival depended on it. The sky was a living chronicle, a guide to the rhythms of life, death, and sustenance. To watch it carefully was to understand the invisible pulse of the world, to map danger and abundance, to predict cycles that would determine whether a community thrived or faltered. The solstice, in particular, became one of the first points where humans could feel the extraordinary reliability of patterns in a universe that often felt chaotic. Imagine standing on a windswept hilltop during the longest night, the cold biting through layers of furs, and lifting your eyes toward the horizon. The sun has been sinking lower each day, its path across the sky gradually shortening. The shadows it casts are longer, the warmth it brings weaker. With careful attention, an observer notices a subtle change. At its lowest point, the sun pauses, lingering along the horizon in a manner distinct from the days before. It is almost imperceptible, a hesitation that signals the turning point. Ancient humans, attentive to these minute rhythms, began to recognize this pause not as an anomaly but as a promise. The sun's apparent standstill becomes a sign that the decline of light is temporary, that the world has a rhythm that will resume. From this, humans begin to understand that the forces governing the natural world are consistent and, in some sense, trustworthy. Over time, the careful observation of the sky transforms from necessity into knowledge, from knowledge into culture. People note patterns in the sunrise and sunset, in the height of the sun at noon, and in the movement of constellations. They track these patterns across months and years, developing a sense of cyclical time that is rooted in lived experience. Each year, the solstice becomes a reference point, a marker by which months and seasons are measured. Unlike a calendar, which abstracts time into numbers, this is a relational understanding. The solstice is known through the body, the senses, and the mind. Humans feel the lengthening and shortening of days, the shift in temperature, the movement of animals, and the flow of rivers. All of these elements are interconnected, part of a single system whose rhythm can be read, interpreted, and understood. The practical benefits of reading the sky are immediate. Knowing when the sun will pause and begin its slow return allows communities to plan hunts, store food, and allocate resources with greater precision. Animals behave according to seasonal cues, plants have cycles of growth and dormancy, and weather patterns follow rhythms that can be anticipated. By connecting the position of the sun to the timing of these events, humans develop an early form of prediction. Survival improves not through strength alone, but through understanding. And yet, the act of observation is not mechanical. It is immersive. Observing the sky requires patience, attention, and a deep engagement with the environment. Each sunrise is measured not in hours, but in nuance. Each shadow is analyzed for its subtle changes. Each color of the horizon is noted. The practice trains perception, teaching humans to see both the vast sweep of the cosmos and the intimate details of their immediate surroundings. The sky also becomes a canvas for imagination and meaning. Beyond practical survival, the apparent movement of the sun, moon, and stars inspires stories, metaphors, and explanations. The sun's slow disappearance and gradual return is interpreted as a narrative of death and rebirth. The stars, fixed yet seemingly alive in their own constellations, provide guidance and orientation. Humans begin to create relationships between what they observe in the sky and what they experience on the ground. The horizon, the changing light, and the patterns of the sun and stars are transformed into a symbolic language. Even without written words, humans develop a cosmology, a system of understanding the world where observation, meaning, and experience intersect. At the solstice, this connection between observation and symbolism is at its most acute. The moment when the sun pauses and then begins to rise again is experienced as both a practical signal and an emotional revelation. It confirms that the cycles of life are continuing, that the pattern of survival is intact, and that the passage of time has a rhythm humans can learn to navigate. But it also evokes wonder. There is something profoundly reassuring, and almost spiritual, about witnessing the slow, deliberate return of light after the longest night. It is a tangible manifestation of resilience, of continuity, and of the subtle order of the natural world. Humans begin to internalize this order, integrating it into memory, ritual, and culture. This understanding is not abstract, it is embodied. Early humans learned to predict the timing of dawn and dusk, to align activities with the sun's position, and to sense the passage of days through changes in temperature, wind, and wildlife behavior. Knowledge of the sky is inseparable from the rhythm of life itself. The ability to read these patterns directly impacts health, safety, and reproduction. It strengthens the bonds of community, as shared observation allows groups to coordinate action. And it cultivates a deep psychological effect, the recognition that while the night may be long and the cold severe, there is an underlying order in the universe that humans can perceive and rely upon. Over generations, these observations become codified into ritual. People begin to anticipate the solstice in ways that are both practical and symbolic. Fires are maintained, gatherings are held, and stories are told, all timed with the sun's movement. Even without formal knowledge of astronomy, humans begin to construct early monuments and markers aligned with solar events, creating tangible links between observation and architecture. These structures, from simple stone circles to more complex alignments, function as early calendars, signaling the progression of time and reinforcing the patterns observed in the sky. They are the physical embodiment of human attentiveness, memory, and cultural continuity. The skill of reading the sky also transforms human perception of causality and consequence. Through repeated observation, humans begin to understand that certain actions lead to predictable results. The sun rises and sets in a cycle, seasons advance and retreat, animals migrate, rivers freeze and thaw. This understanding fosters foresight, patience, and planning. It cultivates a psychological resilience similar to what is developed around fire. Just as tending flames teaches attentiveness and response, observing the heavens teaches humans to anticipate and adapt. The solstice becomes a central point around which these skills coalesce, a day that embodies the culmination of careful observation and the promise of continuity. Emotionally, the solstice observed in this way becomes a point of reflection and subtle reverence. Humans experience awe not because of abstract knowledge, but because of direct engagement with a reliable pattern in a world that is otherwise unpredictable. The pause of the sun is not merely a mechanical event, it is a living demonstration of order amidst chaos. Witnessing it over years and decades reinforces a sense of trust in the cycles of life. It is a quiet lesson in endurance, patience, and the ability to perceive subtle signals in a complex environment. Through the practice of sky watching, humans cultivate both practical skill and profound emotional insight. In this way, reading the sky becomes a cornerstone of early human cognition. It is simultaneously survival strategy, cultural practice, and psychological training. The solstice, with its slow turning of the sun, crystallizes the importance of attentiveness and reflection. It demonstrates that while humans are vulnerable to darkness and cold, they are also capable of perceiving the hidden order that underlies apparent chaos. By engaging with the heavens, early people not only improve their chances of survival, they also begin to construct the foundations of culture, ritual, and meaning that will echo across millennia. The long winters, the threatening nights, and the shifting horizon all converge in the experience of the solstice. Observation transforms fear into understanding, chaos into pattern, and vulnerability into knowledge. The sky teaches humans that even in the depths of darkness, the world follows rhythms that can be observed, anticipated, and trusted. And as the sun begins its slow ascent after the longest night, it imparts a subtle but profound message, that endurance, attentiveness, and shared observation can reveal the hidden order of existence, guiding humanity through the most difficult seasons and providing the first tangible sense of continuity, hope, and the promise of rebirth. Across the rolling hills and misted plains of prehistoric landscapes, humans began to leave traces of themselves that would endure far longer than their fragile bodies. Stone became memory, memory became monument, and monuments became a way of communicating across generations. These early structures were not built for convenience or decoration, they were built to capture the sky, to mark time, and to interact with the cycles of the sun in ways that extended human perception beyond the limits of a single lifetime. Among the most remarkable achievements of this era are the solstice-aligned monuments, whose stones still speak of a deep understanding of the heavens and an intimate relationship with the natural world. Imagine standing at the edge of a newly cleared field, your breath fogging in the cold air, as a group of humans drags massive stones into position. They work slowly, deliberately, with effort measured in hours, days, and months. Each stone is chosen, placed, and oriented with precision. The weight of survival presses on them, yet there is something beyond mere utility in their actions. They are creating a structure that interacts with the sun, one that will mark the shortest and longest days of the year, revealing the hidden order of the cosmos through shadow, light, and alignment. Every placement of stone is both practical and symbolic, a dialogue between human intention and the vast forces of nature. At sites like Newgrange in Ireland or Stonehenge in England, the sophistication of these constructions is evident. Newgrange, for example, is positioned so that on the winter solstice, the rising sun penetrates a long, narrow passage and illuminates the innermost chamber. For a few fleeting minutes, light fills the darkness, creating a transformative experience for anyone present. This is not mere architectural coincidence, it is the culmination of careful observation, long-term planning, and intimate knowledge of the sun's path. These monuments serve as physical proof that humans could perceive patterns far beyond their immediate lifespan and translate them into structures capable of enduring millennia. The act of building such monuments is itself a profound ritual. Consider the labor involved: stones quarried and transported over miles, coordinated effort across dozens, perhaps hundreds of individuals, and the careful orientation of each stone to align with the sun's seasonal movements. These projects were collective endeavors, requiring social cohesion, trust, and shared purpose. In the process, humans were not only constructing a physical object but also reinforcing the bonds that allowed communities to survive the harshness of winter. Each stone carries the weight of social memory, representing the cooperation, endurance, and observation of generations. The monuments become repositories of both knowledge and emotion, standing as silent witnesses to human resilience. The choice to align these structures with the solstice is deeply significant. Unlike simple shelters or utilitarian constructions, solstice monuments are designed to interact with the celestial order. They are intentional intersections between human life and cosmic rhythm. The moment when the sun aligns perfectly with a stone axis is brief, but it transforms the monument from a static object into a dynamic experience. Light becomes a messenger, revealing the intimate connection between the earth, the sky, and the humans who inhabit them. This alignment is not only a technical achievement but also a psychological one, offering proof that the universe follows predictable patterns and that humanity can participate in that order. Beyond the practical and the symbolic, these monuments carry profound emotional resonance. Standing inside or near one, even thousands of years later, it is possible to sense the awe and anticipation of those who first constructed it. The alignment with the sun is not just an abstract measurement, it is an orchestrated encounter with the light that defines life itself. On the winter solstice, when light is scarce and darkness dominates, these stones become conduits of hope. They transform fleeting sunlight into a tangible experience of renewal and continuity. Each monument embodies the understanding that the sun will return, that life will endure, and that human presence has meaning within the vast cycles of nature. The process of constructing these monuments also reflects an early understanding of abstraction and planning. Builders needed to project months, even years, into the future, imagining a day when the sun would interact with their creation in a precise way. This required memory, foresight, and a shared vision that transcended the immediate needs of survival. In this sense, the monuments are not merely structures, they are embodiments of human cognition, creativity, and an emergent sense of culture. They are proof that early humans were capable of abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, and long-term planning, qualities that define the human experience as much as survival skills do. These sites also functioned as centers of communal gathering. The solstice alignment would have been marked by rituals, storytelling, and perhaps offerings. While the full meaning is lost to history, it is clear that these were not solitary acts but deeply social experiences. Communities came together to witness the return of light, to participate in a shared acknowledgement of survival, endurance, and cosmic order. The monuments thus served as both calendars and stages, marking the passage of time while facilitating the emotional and social cohesion essential to human survival in challenging environments. There is a philosophical dimension to these constructions as well. By carving permanence into the landscape, humans were asserting their presence within the natural order. The stones stand in defiance of time, bearing witness to the fleeting lives of the people who placed them. They are not monuments to individual achievement but to collective awareness, memory, and resilience. Each aligned stone, each careful placement, represents a dialogue with the cosmos, a declaration that humans observe, understand, and participate in the cycles of the world. The monuments encode knowledge, ritual, and emotion into a tangible form that can survive centuries, bridging the gap between generations and allowing distant descendants to sense the intentionality and reverence of those who came before. In addition, these monuments illustrate an early blending of the practical and the symbolic. They mark time and predict the return of the sun, yet they also create experiences that transcend the immediate needs of survival. The interplay of shadow and light, the alignment with celestial events, and the ritual gatherings all transform the monuments into spaces of contemplation, reflection, and emotional resonance. Humans begin to understand that the physical world can carry meaning beyond immediate necessity. They begin to see that structures can mediate experience, that the environment itself can be shaped into a vessel of memory, anticipation, and awe. The endurance of these monuments through millennia also mirrors the endurance of the knowledge and rituals they encode. Even after thousands of years, the alignment with the solstice continues to function, revealing the meticulous care and profound understanding of those who built them. The monuments are silent teachers, reminding us that human attention, observation, and collective effort can create structures that outlast individual lifespans, that transform knowledge into tangible form, and that connect the human mind to the rhythms of the cosmos. Through these enduring stones, we glimpse the minds of early humans, observers of the sun, interpreters of patterns, builders of meaning, and creators of ritual. They show us that survival was never merely physical, it was emotional, psychological, and cultural. The solstice-aligned monuments are evidence of the human desire to make the invisible tangible, to mark the passage of time, and to participate consciously in the cycles of life and light. They stand as both tools and symbols, bridging the practical and the mystical, the immediate and the eternal. By interacting with the sun, by aligning massive stones with its fleeting light, humanity claimed a space within the cosmos itself. These structures were not passive, they were active instruments of understanding, endurance, and hope. The act of building them transformed the human relationship with time, nature, and community, creating experiences that bound people together across generations. And on the day when the sun finally penetrates the inner chambers, illuminating what was once dark, the monument fulfills its purpose. It bears witness to the continuity of life, the reliability of patterns, and the enduring power of human intention carved into the very earth. Winter has always carried a dual presence. On one hand, it is a season of beauty, frost-laced landscapes, the soft hush of snow, the stark geometry of leafless trees. On the other hand, it is a season of absence. Life withdraws. Animals migrate or hibernate. Rivers freeze. Food becomes scarce. In prehistoric times, these withdrawals were not gentle or symbolic, they were matters of life and death. Winter was the period when the earth itself seemed to sleep, and humans were acutely aware of their vulnerability in this pause. It was a time when survival demanded caution, ingenuity, and endurance, and it was also a time when reflection, ritual, and emotional resilience emerged in response to the starkness of the season. As the days shortened and the sun sank lower in the sky, humans felt the pressure of winter not just physically but psychologically. Darkness lengthened, and with it came a profound sense of uncertainty. Food caches dwindled, hunting became more dangerous, and travel was restricted by ice and snow. In these conditions, the human mind could not remain entirely pragmatic. It had to find ways to process fear, loss, and the sense of isolation imposed by the environment. In this context, the longest night, the winter solstice, became a focal point for human consciousness. It was both a literal and metaphorical low point, a moment when the natural world seemed paused, holding its breath, and humanity was left to confront the fragility of existence itself. The seasonal death of the earth was mirrored in human life. Illnesses, hunger, and exposure claimed lives with regularity. Communities huddled together for warmth and protection, and social bonds were tested under the strain of scarcity. The natural cycles, growth, abundance, dormancy, and decline, became deeply intertwined with human experience, shaping not only survival strategies but also perception, emotion, and ritual. Observing the world's dormancy forced early humans to confront mortality directly. Life seemed suspended, and in the stark contrast between movement and stillness, humans began to understand the cyclical nature of existence. Winter was death, yet it was also preparation, a time for gathering knowledge, consolidating resources, and reflecting on the continuity of life beyond immediate survival. The Earth's withdrawal during winter encouraged inwardness. Human activity slowed in response to environmental constraints, creating space for contemplation and reflection. The long nights and extended darkness fostered a form of meditative attention, compelling humans to turn inward as much as outward. Stories, songs, and rituals emerged in this context, serving not just to pass time but to give structure and meaning to the long, threatening season. Humans began to explore memory, history, and myth in ways that connected survival with understanding. They reflected on ancestors, on previous winters endured, and on the subtle patterns of nature that ensured continuity. These reflections became early frameworks for cultural identity, moral understanding, and spiritual practice. In addition to encouraging introspection, the stillness of winter sharpened human perception. Without abundant daylight and with the world largely dormant, humans were forced to notice subtle cues in the environment. Tracks in the snow, shifts in wind direction, and the behavior of surviving wildlife became vital signals for survival. Observation deepened attention, teaching humans to perceive connections that were otherwise overlooked during the busier, warmer months. The world's dormancy demanded patience, careful interpretation, and the cultivation of foresight. In this sense, the season itself became a teacher, shaping cognition and emotional resilience simultaneously. Winter's dormancy also created the conditions for ritual innovation. With physical activity limited, humans invested energy into acts that reinforced social cohesion and psychological well-being. Fire became central to these rituals, providing warmth, light, and a focus for shared attention. Communal gatherings, storytelling, and symbolic acts emerged as tools to endure emotional and physical challenges. The solstice, in particular, became a moment around which such rituals crystallized, marking the nadir of darkness while simultaneously anticipating the return of light. Rituals functioned as both emotional scaffolding and practical reinforcement of communal bonds. They allowed humans to externalize internal fears and hopes, creating tangible markers of continuity and resilience. These practices also reflected an early understanding of cyclical existence. Humans recognized that life, like the sun, moves in patterns of decline and return. Winter was not merely an obstacle to overcome, it was an essential phase in a repeating cycle. Observing these cycles provided reassurance that periods of scarcity and darkness were temporary, that survival was possible, and that life itself was resilient. In the stillness and apparent death of the world, humans discovered lessons in patience, endurance, and trust. The Earth's breath, its pause and renewal, became a model for human experience. Life and death were not opposites but phases within a greater rhythm. The withdrawal of life during winter also deepened emotional bonds within communities. Scarcity and exposure demanded cooperation and mutual support. Survival depended on shared effort, knowledge transfer, and attentiveness to each other's needs. The communal experience of enduring winter fostered empathy, social intelligence, and the psychological understanding that the well-being of the individual is inseparable from the well-being of the group. These bonds were reinforced through ritual, storytelling, and shared memory, which provided a narrative structure to the challenges imposed by the season. Humans learned not only to survive physically but to endure emotionally, creating networks of care and attention that were as vital as food or shelter. The interplay of death and renewal was also encoded in symbolic behavior. Observing the Earth's dormancy and the Sun's low trajectory encouraged humans to create metaphors, stories, and proto-religious practices that connected their own mortality with the cycles of nature. The solstice, marking the turning point when darkness begins to recede, became a natural moment to reflect on resilience, continuity, and rebirth. By connecting human life with seasonal patterns, early humans developed an understanding that personal and communal endurance mirrors the endurance of the natural world. Winter's harshness, rather than being purely destructive, became a framework for meaning, fostering reflection on survival, patience, and hope. Furthermore, winter heightened awareness of temporality and impermanence. In observing the stillness of the land, humans recognized that life is fragile and contingent. Each moment of warmth, food, or shelter was precious. Each breath taken in the cold air was an assertion of life against adversity. These experiences, repeated over years, generations, and centuries, cultivated a deep existential awareness, shaping the earliest human conceptions of mortality, continuity, and resilience. The knowledge gained in winter was practical, emotional, and philosophical, embedding itself in human consciousness long before written records or formal philosophy existed. Even within the harshest conditions, humans discovered beauty, awe, and subtle patterns. The reflection of moonlight on snow, the tracks of animals in frost, the crystalline geometry of ice, all offered sensory experiences that inspired attention and contemplation. These moments became integrated into early ritual and narrative, enriching human experience and fostering a connection between observation, reflection, and meaning. The apparent stillness of winter concealed layers of complexity, teaching that even in the depths of dormancy, life persists, patterns exist, and resilience is possible. Winter also cultivated anticipation and hope. While the long nights and scarce resources demanded vigilance, the knowledge that the sun would eventually return created a subtle, enduring optimism. The solstice, as the point where the sun begins its gradual ascent, crystallized this hope into a tangible, observable event. By observing the turning of the sun and the slow lengthening of days, humans could measure the progress of time, anticipate resources, and emotionally prepare for renewal. Winter was simultaneously a teacher of mortality and a rehearsal for the psychological experience of enduring, anticipating, and witnessing recovery. Through this prolonged encounter with seasonal dormancy, humans developed a profound understanding of cycles, resilience, and emotional endurance. Winter, with its death-like qualities, forced attention to survival, community, and reflection, creating conditions for the emergence of ritual, storytelling, and symbolic thought. The long nights, the scarcity, and the silence became not just challenges but opportunities to cultivate attention, awareness, and meaning. Humans learned that death is a phase, darkness is temporary, and life persists through cycles of decline and renewal. In the stillness of the earth's breath, they found a template for understanding their own existence, and a framework for the earliest expressions of culture, reflection, and hope. By observing the retreat of life in winter and anticipating its return, humans internalized lessons that would guide their species for millennia. They recognized that survival is both physical and psychological, that endurance requires both action and reflection, and that patterns in the natural world can inform and stabilize human experience. Winter's dormancy, harsh as it was, became a teacher, a mirror, and a guide. It revealed the fragility and resilience of life simultaneously, embedding a consciousness of cycles, mortality, and renewal deep within the human psyche. In this season of apparent death, humans discovered one of their earliest forms of wisdom, that to endure darkness is to witness the promise of life, that to confront stillness is to prepare for movement, and that within the pause of the world lies the potential for profound insight and rebirth. The turning of the seasons is a subtle teacher, but the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, has always held a unique power over the human imagination. Across countless generations, it became more than a measure of time, it evolved into a symbol, a mirror of human experience, and a point at which the inner and outer worlds intersect. For early humans, the solstice was a threshold, a moment suspended between darkness and light, death and renewal, despair and hope. The significance of this threshold extended beyond survival, it shaped ritual, myth, and the earliest forms of philosophical reflection, offering a space to grapple with the profound uncertainty of existence and the promise of continuity. To stand beneath the sky on the longest night was to confront extremes. Darkness stretched endlessly in every direction, obscuring the familiar contours of landscape and home. The cold pressed against the skin, relentless and unforgiving. Hunger gnawed at the body, and the movements of predators added a subtle, constant tension. In this environment, the human mind could not remain passive. It was forced into heightened awareness, to monitor, anticipate, and respond. Yet even as survival instincts sharpened, another response emerged: reflection. When faced with such extremes, early humans began to notice patterns not only in the external world but within themselves. The solstice, as the apex of darkness, became a point for turning inward, a moment when the rhythms of the cosmos invited meditation on human existence, mortality, and resilience. This inward turn was accompanied by ritual. Fire, already central to survival, became the focal point for ceremonies that marked the solstice. Humans would gather, encircling the flames, singing, chanting, or silently observing. Shadows cast by the fire danced across faces and walls, animating the cave or shelter with movement that reflected internal states, fear, hope, and the anticipation of dawn. These gatherings served multiple functions: they reinforced communal bonds, transmitted knowledge, and provided psychological sustenance. Through ritual, humans externalized the tensions and anxieties provoked by the longest night, transforming fear into symbolic acts that anchored the community and provided a sense of control over forces that were otherwise uncontrollable. Stories told during these rituals were particularly potent. Oral tradition allowed early humans to encode complex knowledge about survival, the cycles of nature, and the movements of celestial bodies. But stories also carried emotional weight, allowing humans to process their experiences and emotions collectively. Tales of the sun's death and rebirth, of heroic hunts, or of ancestral endurance provided frameworks for understanding uncertainty. Each narrative became a bridge between generations, linking past experience with present observation and future anticipation. The solstice served as a temporal marker, reminding communities that time flows in predictable cycles, that the hardships of the night are temporary, and that life endures through careful observation, preparation, and cooperation. The solstice also shaped early humans' perception of causality and consequence. Observing that the sun eventually returns, that days gradually lengthen, and that resources slowly become abundant again taught lessons about patience, persistence, and the reliability of natural patterns. Humans learned to anticipate events and adjust behavior accordingly, cultivating foresight and strategic thinking. This understanding of cycles extended beyond survival. It informed moral and social reasoning, guiding how communities organized themselves, shared resources, and responded to challenges. The solstice became a natural school for learning about interdependence, continuity, and the importance of aligning human activity with the rhythms of the world. Beyond practical observation and ritual, the solstice fostered symbolic thought. The longest night, when light seemed minimal and darkness total, became a canvas for imagining abstract concepts such as death, rebirth, and the continuity of life. Humans began to perceive their lives as embedded within larger cycles, connecting individual experience to seasonal, celestial, and generational rhythms. The sun's slow re-emergence was not merely a physical event, it became a metaphor for resilience, hope, and renewal. By witnessing and ritualizing this event, humans cultivated a psychological and cultural understanding that survival is intertwined with patience, attention, and trust in the unseen forces of nature. This symbolic dimension also informed early cosmologies. Humans began to personify or deify the sun, assigning intention or spirit to its movements. The return of light after the solstice could be interpreted as a triumph of life over darkness, order over chaos, or consciousness over uncertainty. These interpretations were not abstract philosophical exercises, they were deeply practical, embedding moral and cultural guidance within observations of the natural world. By linking human experience to celestial patterns, early humans created frameworks that informed decision-making, social behavior, and spiritual practice. The solstice became a living teacher, demonstrating that endurance, attention, and ritual engagement are intertwined with the rhythms of existence. Communal gatherings during the solstice also had profound emotional and psychological effects. The long night, shared in proximity to fire and human presence, transformed a period of potential despair into an occasion of connection, reflection, and reassurance. Shared stories, songs, and rituals reinforced the sense of belonging and provided a buffer against the psychological strain imposed by darkness, cold, and scarcity. Humans discovered that social cohesion amplifies resilience, that observing cycles together fosters trust, and that emotional endurance is cultivated through shared experience. The solstice, in this sense, was not only a measure of cosmic patterns but also a laboratory for human consciousness, teaching early humans how to endure uncertainty collectively and individually. The solstice also served as a marker for long-term planning. By observing the sun's turning point, humans could anticipate the gradual lengthening of days and the seasonal availability of resources. These anticipatory insights were embedded in both practical actions, such as storing food, organizing hunts, and maintaining shelter, and symbolic acts, which reinforced the communal understanding of cyclical time. The solstice transformed abstract observation into tangible outcomes. Preparation, cooperation, and ritualized reflection all became means of aligning human activity with natural rhythms. Humans learned that attentive observation and patient endurance create stability and continuity in a world that is otherwise unpredictable. Emotionally, the solstice elicited a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. The extended darkness emphasized vulnerability, while the anticipation of light encouraged reflection on perseverance and the meaning of survival. Humans learned to navigate these extremes, to inhabit both fear and hope simultaneously, and to translate emotional tension into ritual, storytelling, and communal practice. This balancing of internal states became a foundational skill, linking cognition, emotion, and social behavior in ways that are still recognizable in modern cultural practices. The longest night, therefore, was not only a physical challenge but also a profound psychological and philosophical event, shaping the earliest human concepts of resilience, meaning, and renewal. The significance of the solstice extended beyond immediate survival into the long-term development of culture, consciousness, and identity. By marking the nadir of darkness and anticipating the return of light, humans developed temporal frameworks that structured memory, experience, and expectation. The solstice created a temporal rhythm that reinforced collective knowledge, guided ethical and social behavior, and provided a foundation for early cosmologies and mythologies. It was a lens through which humans interpreted the relationship between themselves, the natural world, and the forces beyond perception. In essence, the solstice became a teacher of both reality and imagination, demonstrating that enduring the darkness reveals patterns, meaning, and the potential for renewal. Through repeated observation, ritual, and reflection, humans internalized lessons from the solstice that shaped both practical survival strategies and the earliest forms of philosophical insight. They learned to perceive cycles, to anticipate change, and to trust in patterns that are not immediately visible. They discovered the interplay of fear and hope, isolation and community, vulnerability and resilience. The solstice became a bridge between the external and internal worlds, linking cosmic order with human consciousness, and transforming the longest night into an occasion for insight, connection, and symbolic renewal. In this way, the winter solstice emerged as a central pillar in human understanding. It was not merely a day on the calendar, it was a profound experience of temporal, emotional, and cultural significance. By observing the turning of the sun, humans could measure the continuity of the world, reflect on their own mortality, and participate consciously in cycles of life and light. The solstice became a convergence of survival, ritual, observation, and imagination, a moment in which the human mind first began to perceive itself as embedded within a larger, enduring order, capable of enduring darkness while anticipating the inevitable return of light. The human relationship with light is ancient, intimate, and profoundly symbolic. Long before artificial illumination, humans experienced light primarily through the sun and fire, and the contrast between darkness and illumination shaped perception, cognition, and emotion. The solstice, with its apex of darkness and the slow return of sunlight, crystallized this dynamic in a way that profoundly influenced early human thought. Light became more than a physical phenomenon, it became a measure of hope, a symbol of renewal, and a guide to the rhythms of both the natural and inner world. Observing light, tracking its subtle changes, and ritualizing its return were formative acts that shaped the earliest human concepts of meaning, continuity, and self-awareness. Consider the longest night of the year, the sun at its lowest point, the shadows longest, and the world appearing paused in stillness. Darkness was more than the absence of light, it was a tangible presence, pressing upon humans with cold, uncertainty, and vulnerability. In this environment, the first human awareness of the psychological power of light emerged. A single sunrise after days of diminishing daylight could transform the perception of the world entirely. The quality of light, the gradual glow along the horizon, the way it shifts across landscape features, the way it illuminates familiar objects, was both survival information and emotional sustenance. Humans learned to read light, not only to navigate the physical world but to orient themselves emotionally and socially, understanding that illumination signifies both safety and continuity. Fire and the sun functioned in complementary ways. Fire provided immediate, controlled illumination, it could be tended, maintained, and shared within the safety of shelters. The sun, however, operated on a scale far beyond human control, revealing patterns in the sky that repeated predictably year after year. Early humans recognized these patterns, noting subtle shifts in the sun's trajectory, the timing of its rise and fall, and the length of days. These observations became deeply intertwined with survival, guiding agricultural, hunting, and social activities. Yet beyond utility, humans experienced light as a medium of meaning. The return of sunlight after the solstice, its steady climb across the sky, became an emotional and symbolic marker, reflecting the promise of renewal in both nature and human life. Light also facilitated the development of ritual and communal practice. Fire gatherings during the solstice were illuminated spaces where humans could interact safely, communicate knowledge, and participate in shared reflection. Shadows cast by flames created moving images that could be interpreted, dramatized, and incorporated into stories. These narratives often centered around survival, celestial phenomena, and moral or spiritual lessons. Observing the play of light and shadow nurtured imagination, attention, and a sense of interconnection between the visible and invisible, the immediate and the enduring. Humans began to understand that light could mediate experience, transforming raw sensory input into symbolic and emotional understanding. The subtle qualities of natural light were also central to early human temporal awareness. The solstice was the clearest demonstration of cyclical change, the sun pauses at its lowest point before gradually ascending. Observing these shifts over years allowed humans to predict seasons, anticipate resources, and organize communal life around natural rhythms. Light became both a clock and a guide, encoding temporal information directly into perception and memory. Unlike mechanical measurement, this understanding was lived, experiential, and deeply embodied. It demanded patience, acute attention, and the capacity to integrate observation over long periods, a practice that cultivated not only survival skills but also cognitive depth. The symbolic resonance of light extended beyond the practical into the realm of existential reflection. In the long darkness of winter, the first appearance of sunlight after the solstice could evoke awe, relief, and emotional renewal. Humans began to see light as a metaphor for life overcoming adversity, for consciousness emerging from uncertainty, and for continuity within a fragile world. These associations likely informed early mythology, spiritual practices, and moral reasoning. Light came to represent order in contrast to chaos, knowledge in contrast to ignorance, and hope in contrast to despair. The solstice, with its deliberate interplay of darkness and the gradual return of light, became the natural stage upon which these concepts could be observed, enacted, and internalized. Observing light also encouraged abstraction and foresight. Early humans learned to anticipate sunrise, to measure the intensity and angle of sunlight, and to correlate these observations with environmental cues such as animal behavior, plant cycles, and weather patterns. Light became a vector for understanding causality. Subtle shifts in illumination signaled changes in the season, which in turn required strategic adaptation. These skills went beyond mere survival. They trained attention, patience, and pattern recognition, forming a cognitive foundation for symbolic thought. The solstice was a moment in which these lessons were made most vivid, a temporal and spatial anchor around which humans could interpret the world. The interplay of firelight and sunlight also fostered aesthetic and emotional sensibilities. The movement of shadows, the glow of embers, and the first rays of dawn inspired reflection, imagination, and storytelling. Humans began to perceive beauty in patterns, rhythms, and contrasts, linking sensory experience to emotional response and meaning-making. Light became both medium and message. It communicated the passage of time, highlighted significant events, and elicited complex feelings ranging from fear to awe to hope. These experiences reinforced the idea that the environment is not only a site of survival but also a space for contemplation and symbolic engagement. Communal observation of light reinforced social cohesion. Gathering around fire or witnessing sunrise together created shared experiences that strengthened bonds, aligned understanding, and facilitated the transmission of knowledge. Humans learned that collective attention magnifies both survival and cultural continuity. Observing light together, celebrating its return, and ritualizing its patterns were ways of embedding information and emotion into community memory. The solstice functioned as a temporal milestone, providing a recurring opportunity to align social, practical, and spiritual life with the rhythms of nature. Light also fostered reflection on mortality and renewal. Darkness symbolized uncertainty, scarcity, and vulnerability, while the return of light symbolized continuity, growth, and hope. Humans began to perceive that periods of deprivation are temporary, that cycles are reliable, and that endurance through adversity leads to renewal. The solstice dramatizes this principle. The longest night inevitably precedes the gradual return of sunlight. By observing and internalizing this pattern, humans cultivated resilience, patience, and a capacity for hope, a psychological adaptation as critical as any physical skill for survival in harsh environments. Through repeated experience, humans developed an intuitive philosophy grounded in the observation of light and darkness. They recognized patterns, predicted outcomes, and created meaning from cyclical phenomena. Light became a metaphor for knowledge, continuity, and life itself, while darkness became a symbol of uncertainty and challenge. The solstice, as the apex of this interplay, crystallized these insights into a powerful, observable, and emotionally resonant event. It was a teacher, a guide, and a stage for human consciousness, linking survival, ritual, cognition, and emotion in a single, enduring experience. In essence, light shaped the earliest human understanding of both the external and internal worlds. It provided practical guidance, emotional sustenance, and symbolic meaning. Observing its patterns encouraged reflection, anticipation, and imagination. Ritual and communal practices around fire and sunrise reinforced social cohesion and cultural continuity. Through the solstice, humans learned to navigate darkness, anticipate renewal, and perceive themselves as part of larger cycles of life and nature. Light became not just a physical necessity but a medium through which humans could interpret reality, cultivate resilience, and explore the profound interplay between survival, meaning, and the enduring rhythms of the universe. The experience of ritual has always been central to the human journey, bridging the tangible and intangible, the practical and symbolic, the known and the mysterious. In the context of the winter solstice, ritual emerges not as mere performance but as a profound interface between human consciousness and the rhythms of the natural world. Long before formalized religion or codified ceremonies, early humans used ritual to navigate the extremes of the longest night, to interpret the subtle signals of light and darkness, and to reinforce the bonds that allowed survival in a harsh and unpredictable environment. These early practices were deeply embodied, emotional, and symbolic, revealing the earliest forms of meaning-making that connect humans to each other, to time, and to the cosmos. Imagine a cave at the edge of a frozen landscape, where families and small communities gather around a fire. The cold presses outside, the wind whines through narrow openings, and the night stretches endlessly. Inside, the fire crackles and throws flickering shadows across rough stone walls. This is a space simultaneously of protection, observation, and transformation. The participants are not merely seeking warmth, they are enacting a dialogue with the world beyond the cave. Movement, song, and story emerge naturally, guided by the flickering flames and the awareness of the solstice's significance. Each gesture, chant, or narrative is a rehearsal of survival and a rehearsal of consciousness, integrating knowledge, emotion, and social cohesion into a shared ritual practice. Ritual around the solstice serves multiple purposes. Practically, it provides structure during a time of environmental uncertainty. Winter is a season of scarcity, cold, and extended darkness, and ritual offers a predictable framework within which individuals can act, cooperate, and reinforce social bonds. The division of labor, tending the fire, preparing food, observing the sun's trajectory, or guiding communal storytelling, creates a rhythm that organizes daily life and ensures the survival of the group. Beyond the practical, ritual functions psychologically, offering a means to externalize fear, anticipate renewal, and cultivate patience. The repetition of gestures, sounds, and narratives fosters a sense of stability, anchoring humans against the emotional weight of the long night. The symbolic dimension of solstice ritual is equally profound. Through repeated observation of celestial patterns, early humans discerned cycles of decline and renewal. The solstice, marking the pivot between the shortest day and the slow return of light, naturally became a focal point for symbolic enactment. Ritual actions, whether lighting fires, placing offerings, singing, or performing coordinated movements, embodied abstract principles such as death and rebirth, darkness and illumination, endings and beginnings. In this way, humans began to translate observation into metaphor, experience into meaning, and survival into reflection. The solstice becomes both a lived event and a stage for interpreting existence, linking human life to larger, recurring patterns in nature. Ritual also fosters social cohesion, which is essential for survival in extreme conditions. The longest night is a period when vulnerability is heightened, and cooperation is not optional but critical. By gathering in shared ritual practice, communities reinforce trust, mutual dependence, and collective identity. The act of observing the solstice together, of celebrating the return of light, and of enacting symbolic gestures creates an embodied understanding that individual well-being is inseparable from communal well-being. Ritual thus functions as both emotional scaffolding and practical reinforcement of group cohesion, embedding survival strategies within cultural and symbolic frameworks. The sensory elements of ritual, light, movement, sound, and touch, serve to deepen engagement and reinforce memory. Firelight illuminates faces and walls, creating shifting patterns that draw attention and inspire imagination. Chanting or singing creates rhythm, synchronizes action, and strengthens emotional resonance. Physical gestures, gestures of offering, dancing, or symbolic movement, translate internal states into observable action, reinforcing cognition and emotion simultaneously. These embodied experiences create lasting impressions, allowing knowledge, values, and symbolic associations to be transmitted across generations even without written language. Ritual becomes a repository of collective memory, encoding survival knowledge, social norms, and cosmological understanding in tangible, repeatable forms. Ritual practice around the solstice also nurtures foresight and planning. By engaging in ceremonies aligned with celestial events, humans develop awareness of time and seasonal cycles. Observation of the sun's position, the length of nights, and the subtle shifts of environmental conditions informs both practical preparation and symbolic action. Food storage, hunting schedules, and protective strategies are coordinated in relation to these cycles, while ritual actions reinforce communal awareness of these temporal patterns. In this way, ritual functions as both a pedagogical tool and a social contract, teaching attention, memory, and anticipation while binding the community through shared knowledge and experience. Emotional processing is another crucial function of solstice ritual. The longest night can be psychologically taxing, eliciting fear, anxiety, and a sense of vulnerability. Ritual provides a safe container for these emotions, transforming them into symbolic acts that can be observed, enacted, and collectively understood. Singing, storytelling, and fire tending offer tangible ways to channel emotional energy, providing relief, reassurance, and reinforcement of hope. Through ritual, fear is not simply endured, it is mediated, integrated, and transformed into communal understanding and resilience. The creative and imaginative aspects of ritual also emerge during this time. Shadows cast by fire, the shifting light of dawn, and the dramatic interplay of darkness and illumination inspire storytelling, myth-making, and symbolic interpretation. Humans begin to articulate narratives that extend beyond immediate survival, exploring origins, morality, and the relationships between humans, animals, and celestial forces. Ritual becomes a space in which imagination and observation converge, producing cultural artifacts that endure long after the original participants have passed. These stories and gestures encode not only knowledge but also emotional truth, linking human experience to the rhythms of nature and the cosmos. Through repeated practice, ritual fosters a sophisticated understanding of human temporality. Participants experience the solstice as a recurring event, learning to anticipate the lengthening of days and the return of warmth and abundance. This cyclical awareness informs both practical survival and symbolic reasoning. It teaches patience, cultivates hope, and integrates individual experience into a broader temporal framework. By participating in solstice ritual over generations, humans develop a consciousness of continuity that transcends the lifespan, linking present action to past observation and future expectation. Ritual becomes a bridge across time, connecting individual perception with collective memory and cosmic pattern. Ritual also reinforces the integration of mind and body. Physical actions, vocalizations, and attentiveness to environmental cues combine to create experiences that are deeply embodied. Humans do not merely reflect on patterns abstractly, they live them through movement, coordination, and sensory engagement. This embodied cognition strengthens memory, emotional processing, and social learning, making ritual a comprehensive tool for human adaptation. The solstice, with its dramatic interplay of light, darkness, and seasonal change, provides an ideal context for cultivating these skills, embedding knowledge, and fostering psychological resilience. Finally, ritual around the solstice bridges survival and meaning. While early humans undoubtedly engaged in these practices for pragmatic reasons, ensuring cooperation, tracking time, and managing resources, the symbolic, emotional, and imaginative dimensions were inseparable. Fire, song, gesture, and story became intertwined with the cycles of the sun and the patterns of the natural world. Humans learned that survival is not merely physical but also emotional, social, and cognitive. Ritual provided a framework for translating fear into understanding, scarcity into preparation, and darkness into anticipation of renewal. In this way, solstice rituals represent one of the earliest forms of human cultural sophistication. They combine observation, symbolism, emotion, imagination, and social cohesion into practices that endure beyond the immediate challenges of survival. By enacting these rituals, humans cultivated attention, foresight, creativity, and resilience. They created shared experiences that reinforced community and transmitted knowledge across generations. The solstice became not only a temporal marker but a stage upon which humans explored the depths of consciousness, the meaning of endurance, and the profound interplay between the individual, the community, and the natural world. Through ritual, humans transformed the longest night from a period of threat into an occasion of insight, creativity, and connection. They discovered that symbolic action could amplify survival, stabilize social bonds, and mediate emotional states. The solstice became a living lesson in continuity, pattern recognition, and the capacity to endure uncertainty. By participating in these rituals, humans learned to inhabit darkness while anticipating light, to navigate fear while cultivating hope, and to perceive themselves as part of a larger, enduring cycle. In these early practices, we see the foundations of culture, consciousness, and the human capacity to find meaning within the vast, cyclical rhythms of the world. The relationship between humans and the natural world has always been intricate, intimate, and profoundly reciprocal. In the context of the winter solstice, this relationship takes on heightened significance, as the cycles of the earth and sky become directly intertwined with human survival, ritual, and understanding. Early humans were not passive observers, they were participants in a living, breathing system. Every shift in temperature, every subtle change in light, and every movement of flora and fauna was noticed, interpreted, and incorporated into practical strategies and symbolic practices. The solstice, as the extreme point of darkness and the pivot toward light, provided a focal point for this awareness, crystallizing the dynamic between observation, adaptation, and meaning-making in a way that would echo through generations. In the harsh landscapes of prehistoric winters, the environment dictated the terms of survival. Cold pressed in from all directions, water sources froze, and food became scarce. Humans had to be acutely attentive, reading the land for signs of animal movement, understanding the behavior of plants, and tracking subtle climatic cues that could indicate changes in weather. These observations were not abstract, they were practical imperatives. Yet, over time, attention to these details transformed into something more. Humans began to perceive patterns, not just in immediate events but across seasons, years, and generations. The solstice marked a predictable pivot, an observable turning point that symbolized the continuity of life despite the apparent stillness and dormancy of the world. It became a natural teacher, revealing the reliability of cycles and the subtle order embedded in the environment. The cyclical nature of the Earth's processes shaped both human behavior and thought. The retreat of life during winter, the hibernation of animals, the shedding of leaves, and the quiet of rivers and streams, was mirrored in human activity. Communities slowed, conserving energy, stockpiling resources, and focusing on survival within confined spaces. Yet this dormancy also created space for observation, reflection, and ritual. Humans began to internalize the rhythms of the world, developing a sense of temporality grounded in lived experience rather than abstract measurement. The solstice, occurring at the nadir of light and warmth, crystallized these lessons. It was a marker of transition, signaling both the peak of challenge and the promise of renewal, and it provided a natural anchor around which humans could organize knowledge, action, and meaning. The connection between humans and animals during this season was particularly acute. Predators and prey alike adjusted their behavior according to environmental cues. Tracking the movement of animals in deep snow or under minimal light required extraordinary attentiveness. Understanding these patterns could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation. Humans learned to anticipate animal behavior, to align hunting strategies with the subtle signs in the environment, and to integrate this knowledge into collective practice. Yet these practical insights were deeply intertwined with symbolic interpretation. Animals were not only food sources, they were also carriers of meaning, embedded in stories, rituals, and communal understanding. Observing the movements of deer, elk, or migratory birds during the longest nights of the year contributed to early forms of environmental literacy, myth-making, and the cultivation of awe. Plants, too, offered subtle guidance. Early humans recognized that certain plants withstood the cold, while others went dormant. Observing the timing of bud formation, leaf shedding, and frost cycles allowed humans to anticipate seasonal changes and prepare accordingly. These observations were integrated into both practical planning and symbolic frameworks. The solstice, marking the turning point from decreasing to increasing light, became a temporal reference for understanding these natural rhythms. Humans internalized the knowledge that life retreats and returns in predictable cycles, embedding this awareness into both memory and ritual practice. The return of sunlight after the solstice was mirrored in the gradual re-emergence of plant life, reinforcing the interconnectedness of cosmic and terrestrial rhythms. Water sources, rivers, and ice were equally significant. The freezing of streams altered human movement, hunting, and settlement patterns. Understanding when ice would safely support travel or when streams would thaw was crucial for survival. These observations required patience, attentiveness, and intergenerational transmission of knowledge. They also carried symbolic weight. The freezing and thawing of water became metaphors for dormancy and renewal, mirroring the broader patterns observed in the sky and in animal behavior. Through repeated observation, humans developed a sophisticated awareness of environmental causality, linking climatic, hydrological, and biological cues to practical decision-making and ritualized reflection. The environment shaped the development of early human cognition in profound ways. Living in intimate contact with the cycles of nature fostered attentiveness, pattern recognition, and predictive reasoning. Humans learned to integrate sensory information over extended periods, to anticipate outcomes based on subtle cues, and to translate these insights into action. The solstice offered a particularly clear demonstration of these cognitive capacities. By observing the sun's lowest point and its gradual return, humans reinforced understanding of cycles, causality, and temporal rhythm. This knowledge was encoded not just in memory but in social practice, ritual, and material culture, creating a multifaceted system for interacting with the environment. Communal engagement with the natural world also reinforced social bonds. Shared observation, collective preparation, and communal rituals around the solstice ensured cooperation, trust, and interdependence. Groups that successfully aligned behavior with environmental cycles were more likely to survive and thrive. Ritual, storytelling, and coordinated labor were not ancillary but central to survival, transforming knowledge of the natural world into collective wisdom. The solstice, as a predictable marker, provided both a practical and symbolic anchor, enabling humans to synchronize activity, reinforce memory, and cultivate a sense of shared purpose. The environment thus shaped not only cognition but also social structure, creating interdependent networks of observation, action, and cultural continuity. Humans also began to perceive themselves as participants within larger cycles rather than as isolated actors. Observing the interplay of darkness and light, the retreat and return of life, and the subtle signals of the environment fostered a sense of embeddedness in a broader order. The solstice dramatized this perspective, offering a tangible moment when human observation intersects with cosmic rhythm. The return of sunlight after the longest night was not merely a relief, it was a confirmation of the interconnectedness of life, the reliability of cycles, and the possibility of endurance. This awareness shaped early philosophical thought, embedding lessons about continuity, resilience, and the integration of individual action within collective and cosmic patterns. The aesthetic and emotional dimensions of the environment were equally influential. The patterns of light on snow, the geometry of frost, and the movement of shadows at dawn offered moments of beauty and reflection. These sensory experiences were not separate from survival, they informed attention, imagination, and meaning-making. Observing environmental patterns nurtured creativity and emotional depth, reinforcing the interplay between cognition, perception, and feeling. The solstice, with its dramatic extremes of darkness and the return of illumination, became a particularly powerful stage for these experiences, integrating observation, ritual, emotion, and symbolism into a cohesive human engagement with the natural world. Through repeated interaction with the environment, humans cultivated an embodied understanding of temporality, causality, and continuity. They learned to anticipate change, interpret subtle signals, and synchronize behavior with recurring cycles. The solstice functioned as a temporal and symbolic anchor, providing a predictable reference for coordinating survival strategies, ritual practices, and emotional processing. Humans internalized lessons about patience, endurance, and the reliability of natural patterns, embedding this knowledge in both cognitive frameworks and cultural practices. The environment was simultaneously teacher, guide, and mirror, shaping human perception, thought, and emotional life. Ultimately, the human relationship with the natural world during the solstice illustrates the profound integration of survival, cognition, ritual, and symbolism. Observing cycles of light, animal behavior, plant growth, and environmental cues created a multidimensional understanding of life, temporality, and continuity. Ritual and communal practices reinforced this understanding, transforming observation into embodied knowledge, shared memory, and symbolic meaning. The solstice provided a focal point for this engagement, crystallizing the dynamic interplay between humans and their environment, and laying the foundation for the cognitive, cultural, and emotional sophistication that defines humanity. Through attentive interaction with the natural world, humans discovered resilience, continuity, and a profound sense of belonging within the enduring rhythms of life. Human consciousness has always been shaped not only by the environment but also by the stories we tell ourselves about it. During the deep, long nights of winter, when darkness pressed in and survival demanded constant attention, humans began to create narratives that transcended immediate necessity. These narratives were not simply entertainment, they were frameworks for understanding existence, encoding knowledge, and guiding action. The winter solstice, as the moment when darkness reaches its zenith before giving way to the return of light, became a central axis around which these narratives crystallized. It was both a temporal marker and a symbolic stage, providing a canvas for humans to project their fears, hopes, and reflections on mortality and continuity. Stories during the solstice were deeply intertwined with survival. By embedding knowledge about the cycles of the sun, the behavior of animals, and the availability of resources into narratives, early humans ensured that crucial information could be transmitted across generations. These stories were not abstract lectures but vivid, memorable experiences. They often combined observation with imagination, transforming practical lessons into emotionally resonant tales that engaged memory, attention, and social learning. By listening, participating, and retelling, community members internalized both the practical wisdom and the symbolic meaning embedded in these narratives, reinforcing resilience, foresight, and communal cohesion. The narratives also served as tools for emotional processing. Winter was a season of scarcity, cold, and heightened vulnerability, and the solstice, as the longest night, could be psychologically daunting. Stories allowed humans to confront fear, uncertainty, and mortality within a safe and structured framework. By dramatizing the cycles of death and renewal, the retreat and return of light, and the endurance of ancestors and heroes, humans could externalize internal anxieties and transform them into symbolic understanding. These narratives provided hope, demonstrating that darkness is temporary, that survival is possible, and that life follows predictable rhythms. They became emotional scaffolding, linking experience, reflection, and expectation in a way that reinforced both individual and collective resilience. Mythmaking during the solstice also reflected early philosophical thought. Humans began to interpret natural phenomena as part of a larger, interconnected system, attributing intention, agency, or spirit to the sun, the stars, and the changing seasons. The return of light after the solstice was not merely a mechanical observation, it became a metaphor for life, consciousness, and renewal. By framing the sun's movement in narrative form, humans explored abstract ideas about mortality, time, and the continuity of existence. Stories became vehicles for early cosmology, moral reasoning, and symbolic understanding, linking human action to cosmic order and providing a structure through which individuals could interpret both personal and communal experience. The performative aspects of these narratives reinforced memory and social cohesion. Storytelling was often accompanied by gesture, song, and communal participation, creating an immersive experience that engaged multiple senses. Shadows cast by fire illuminated faces and walls, transforming listeners into active participants in the narrative. These embodied practices ensured that the knowledge, symbolism, and emotional content of stories were deeply internalized. The solstice provided a predictable temporal framework for these performances, enabling communities to synchronize memory, practice, and expectation. In this way, narrative functioned not only as a repository of information but as a living, participatory experience that reinforced the integration of cognition, emotion, and social identity. Narratives also fostered imaginative engagement with the natural world. By personifying animals, attributing spirit to the sun, or dramatizing environmental phenomena, humans explored the interplay between observation and interpretation. Stories allowed individuals to experiment with meaning, testing hypotheses about cause and consequence, and projecting human concerns onto the broader cycles of nature. The solstice, with its extremes of light and darkness, provided particularly potent material for this imaginative exploration. The temporary dominance of darkness heightened attention, the return of light encouraged reflection, and the cyclical nature of the event reinforced understanding of continuity. Humans learned to link observation, anticipation, and interpretation into coherent, emotionally resonant narratives that shaped cognition, culture, and experience. Through repeated retelling, these narratives became cultural memory. Knowledge about seasonal cycles, social norms, survival strategies, and cosmological understanding was encoded into stories that could endure across generations. The solstice acted as a recurring anchor, ensuring that these narratives remained relevant and resonant. By marking the pivot between darkness and light, the solstice provided both a temporal and symbolic reference point around which communities could organize understanding, ritual, and social cohesion. In this sense, narrative became both a practical tool for survival and a medium for shaping consciousness, linking experience across time and embedding meaning into the rhythms of existence. The narratives also reflected an early understanding of the interplay between chance, agency, and structure. Humans recognized that while natural cycles are reliable, survival depends on attention, skill, and cooperation. Stories conveyed this dual lesson through metaphor, allegory, and dramatization, teaching listeners to respect natural patterns while cultivating foresight and resourcefulness. Heroes and ancestors in these tales often embody virtues such as patience, attentiveness, and endurance, illustrating the alignment between human action and environmental rhythms. The solstice, as the pivot point between decline and renewal, provided an ideal narrative framework for conveying these lessons, dramatizing the tension between vulnerability and resilience, darkness and light, death and renewal. Emotionally, these narratives were transformative. They allowed humans to inhabit extremes of fear and hope, scarcity and abundance, vulnerability and empowerment, within a controlled and communal setting. By experiencing these extremes vicariously through story, humans practiced resilience, cultivated empathy, and internalized symbolic meaning. The solstice, with its dramatic juxtaposition of longest night and the promise of returning light, intensified these experiences, making narratives especially potent. Humans learned that stories can shape perception, guide action, and stabilize emotional states, providing both psychological and cultural tools for navigating the challenges of existence. Over time, these narratives contributed to the development of symbolic thinking. Humans began to see connections between disparate phenomena, the movement of the sun, the behavior of animals, the dormancy of plants, and the cycles of human life. Stories encoded these connections, transforming observation into abstraction and experience into insight. The solstice, as a recurring and highly visible event, crystallized these connections, providing a temporal and symbolic axis around which humans could integrate knowledge, ritual, and imagination. Through narrative, humans developed a capacity to represent, reflect, and project, laying the foundations for complex culture, philosophy, and art. In essence, storytelling around the solstice represents one of the earliest forms of human self-reflection and cultural sophistication. It integrates observation, emotion, ritual, and imagination into a coherent framework for understanding the world and the human place within it. Narratives provided survival knowledge, emotional regulation, social cohesion, and symbolic meaning, all anchored to the observable rhythms of the natural world. By engaging with these stories, humans learned to navigate uncertainty, anticipate renewal, and perceive continuity across time. The solstice, as both event and symbol, served as a teacher, a stage, and a mirror, fostering an intimate relationship between human consciousness, environmental cycles, and the power of narrative to shape experience, meaning, and collective memory. Through repeated engagement with solstice narratives, humans cultivated a consciousness capable of linking observation to imagination, survival to reflection, and individual experience to communal memory. They discovered that stories are not mere entertainment but instruments of cognition, emotion, and social cohesion. They learned to inhabit darkness while anticipating light, to confront vulnerability while envisioning resilience, and to embed personal experience within enduring cycles of nature. In this way, the solstice narratives laid the foundations for the human capacity to find meaning, continuity, and symbolic resonance within the cyclical rhythms of the world. The concept of rebirth is one of the most enduring and profound themes in human consciousness, and nowhere is it more poignantly expressed than in the rhythms of the natural world, particularly during the winter solstice. The longest night, when darkness reaches its peak, presents a dramatic and tangible representation of endings, decay, and vulnerability. Yet it simultaneously contains within it the promise of return, of renewal, and of life emerging once more. Early humans, intimately attuned to the cycles of the environment, perceived these patterns not simply as physical phenomena but as deeply symbolic mirrors of their own existence. The solstice became a moment in which the interplay of life, death, and regeneration could be observed, ritualized, and internalized, forming one of the earliest expressions of the human understanding of cyclical renewal and inner rebirth. The natural world itself presents countless examples of this cycle. Plants appear to die or retreat into dormancy during the long winter months, yet beneath the frost, life continues, storing energy, growing slowly in hidden ways, and preparing for eventual resurgence. Animals hibernate or migrate, disappearing from view yet remaining part of a larger, ongoing ecological system. Early humans, reliant on observation for survival, could not ignore these patterns. They saw that the apparent death of the earth was temporary, that the return of light would awaken dormant life, and that the cycles of nature provide both limits and assurances. This observation of natural rebirth became intertwined with human ritual, imagination, and philosophy, giving rise to concepts of renewal that transcended the physical into the psychological and symbolic. Human rituals during the solstice often reflected this theme of rebirth. Fires were tended not only for warmth and protection but as symbols of enduring light amidst darkness. Communal gatherings involved singing, chanting, and movement that enacted the transition from decline to renewal. Offerings might be made to honor the sun's return or the reawakening of life in the environment. Through these embodied practices, humans participated in the cycles of nature, transforming passive observation into active engagement. The solstice thus became not only a temporal marker but a performative acknowledgement of life's resilience and the inevitability of renewal, reinforcing both practical and symbolic understanding. This concept of cyclical renewal was mirrored internally as well. The longest night encouraged reflection and introspection. Humans confronted vulnerability, scarcity, and mortality during winter, and these experiences cultivated a psychological awareness that mirrored the patterns observed in the natural world. Just as the sun would inevitably rise, and as plants and animals would re-emerge, humans recognized that despair and limitation were temporary states. The solstice functioned as a mirror for inner processes, providing a natural model for personal and communal renewal. By aligning human consciousness with the rhythms of the environment, early humans could cultivate hope, resilience, and a capacity for transformation that was as practical as it was symbolic. The emergence of myth and symbolic thought further reinforced this understanding. Stories associated with the solstice often depicted themes of death and rebirth, the triumph of light over darkness, and the renewal of life following periods of hardship. Heroes, ancestors, or deities might descend into darkness only to return transformed, mirroring the cycles of the sun, the environment, and human existence. These narratives offered frameworks for interpreting personal experience, for embedding the challenges of life within larger, comprehensible patterns, and for cultivating a sense of purpose and continuity. They encoded lessons about endurance, patience, and the inevitability of renewal, ensuring that both knowledge and wisdom could be transmitted across generations. The psychological impact of recognizing cyclical rebirth cannot be overstated. The solstice presents an extreme, visceral confrontation with darkness and scarcity, which naturally elicits fear, anxiety, and reflection on mortality. Yet within this confrontation lies the potential for hope, as humans witness and anticipate the gradual return of light. This duality, descent into darkness and eventual emergence into illumination, fosters resilience, emotional regulation, and an understanding of impermanence. Humans learn to navigate extremes, to tolerate uncertainty, and to cultivate patience and foresight. The solstice thus becomes a teacher not only of natural rhythms but of the internal capacities required to endure, adapt, and flourish. Rebirth also finds expression in material and symbolic culture. Objects, art, and temporary constructions associated with solstice rituals often embody the themes of renewal. Fire, light, and movement are central, representing the continuity of life and the persistent emergence of energy from apparent stillness. Symbolic representations of the sun, animals, or plants may be incorporated into these practices, reinforcing the observation that life persists through cycles. These material and performative elements make abstract concepts tangible, allowing humans to experience renewal both physically and psychologically. By participating in these rituals, communities internalize the cyclical nature of life, encoding understanding through embodied action and shared experience. The solstice also reinforces social and intergenerational transmission of this understanding. By observing the cycles together and participating in rituals that dramatize the themes of death and renewal, communities create shared narratives that connect individual experience to collective memory. Elders and experienced members guide younger generations, passing on knowledge about environmental patterns, ritual practice, and the symbolic significance of renewal. In this way, the solstice becomes a communal anchor for both survival strategies and cultural continuity, ensuring that awareness of cyclical rebirth endures as a shared, intergenerational wisdom. Furthermore, cyclical rebirth has an ethical dimension embedded in these practices. Early humans recognized the necessity of aligning human activity with natural rhythms, conserving resources during periods of scarcity, and cooperating for communal survival. By observing and ritualizing the solstice, humans internalized the principle that life is sustained through patience, attentiveness, and respect for cycles. This awareness fosters responsibility, foresight, and care, not only for oneself but for the community and the broader environment. The solstice becomes a symbolic guide, teaching that renewal is contingent upon harmony with both natural and social systems. The interplay of darkness and light also provided a framework for exploring abstract human concerns. The descent into darkness is an opportunity for reflection on mortality, limitations, and the fragility of life. The return of light, conversely, symbolizes possibility, transformation, and the endurance of life. Humans internalized these observations into a sophisticated understanding of cycles that applied both externally in the natural world and internally in human consciousness. The solstice dramatizes these lessons, providing a recurring experiential model for understanding resilience, continuity, and the inevitability of renewal. Through repeated observation and ritual, the solstice fosters a temporal consciousness that links individual, communal, and cosmic cycles. Humans learn to anticipate change, to recognize patterns, and to situate personal experience within a broader rhythm of life. The interplay of darkness and light teaches that endings are not permanent, that challenges are temporary, and that each cycle carries the potential for transformation. This temporal and symbolic awareness becomes embedded in human cognition, culture, and emotion, shaping behavior, ritual, and the capacity to navigate uncertainty. Ultimately, the solstice's message of rebirth encompasses survival, psychological resilience, social cohesion, and symbolic meaning. It transforms the longest night from a time of fear and scarcity into an occasion for reflection, ritual, and the recognition of continuity. Humans discover that darkness is a necessary precursor to illumination, that dormancy is a prelude to growth, and that cycles of life are both inevitable and instructive. Through the solstice, early humans developed a consciousness attuned to rhythm, pattern, and renewal, internalizing lessons that extend beyond the physical world into the realms of philosophy, emotion, and culture. By engaging with the solstice as a model for rebirth, humans cultivated both inner and outer forms of resilience. They observed, reflected, enacted, and internalized the principles of cyclical renewal, linking survival with symbolic understanding and personal growth. The longest night becomes a stage upon which humans confront the tension between endings and beginnings, vulnerability and hope, decay and regeneration. Through these experiences, humans learn that life is a continuous interplay of descent and ascent, dormancy and emergence, and that the cycles of the natural world provide a profound template for understanding their own existence. In this way, the solstice embodies one of the earliest and most enduring insights into the human condition, that within darkness lies the promise of light, within endings lies the seed of renewal, and within every cycle of life exists the potential for rebirth. The concept of light as a symbol extends far beyond the mere physical presence of the sun. It permeates human consciousness as a marker of hope, clarity, and transformation. In the context of the winter solstice, the return of light after the longest night assumes a layered significance, intertwining survival, ritual, and deep psychological resonance. Early humans experienced the solstice not only as a physical event but as a profound emotional and symbolic phenomenon. Darkness, with its pressures and threats, created heightened awareness, while the gradual return of illumination offered relief, reassurance, and a tangible sense of renewal. Light thus became a medium through which humans could interpret, regulate, and navigate both the external world and internal experience, forging connections between observation, emotion, and meaning. During the longest night, humans were confronted with extremes, cold, scarcity, and vulnerability pressed from every direction. Darkness was not simply the absence of light but an active force, shaping perception, mood, and social behavior. In these conditions, fire and other sources of illumination became central to survival, offering warmth and safety. Yet beyond their practical function, light also mediated psychological experience. The glow of fire provided a focal point for communal gathering, facilitating social cohesion and shared reflection. Flames flickering across faces and walls created dynamic visual landscapes that engaged imagination and memory, transforming passive observation into active participation. The solstice thus heightened the emotional and symbolic power of light, embedding it in human consciousness as a source of orientation, reassurance, and meaning. Light also functioned as a temporal marker. Early humans learned to track the sun's position, the length of days, and the subtle shifts of illumination across the landscape. These observations allowed for anticipatory planning, predicting seasonal changes, aligning resource collection with environmental patterns, and coordinating communal activities. The solstice represents the pinnacle of this temporal awareness, serving as a clear, observable point at which the decline of daylight reverses and the promise of longer days emerges. By observing and ritualizing this transition, humans embedded temporal knowledge into both practical and symbolic frameworks, linking daily survival with broader patterns of cosmic and terrestrial order. Light, in this sense, is both an environmental cue and a carrier of cultural and cognitive insight. The symbolic dimension of light extends into the philosophical and existential. Darkness evokes fear, uncertainty, and reflection on mortality, while light embodies life, knowledge, and continuity. The solstice dramatizes this contrast, offering a concentrated experience in which humans confront the extremes of vulnerability and the promise of renewal. Early humans internalized this contrast, perceiving the return of light as a metaphor for resilience, growth, and transformation. These experiences laid the groundwork for abstract thinking, allowing humans to link observable phenomena with emotional, moral, and philosophical insight. Light became more than a sensory reality, it became a language for expressing hope, continuity, and the enduring rhythms of life. Ritual practice amplified the significance of light during the solstice. Fires were tended, candles were lit, and spaces were illuminated intentionally, creating an environment in which communal focus, reflection, and symbolic enactment converged. The movement of shadows, the glow across faces, and the rhythmic play of firelight engaged participants both cognitively and emotionally. Through these embodied practices, light became an agent of cultural transmission, embedding survival knowledge, ethical principles, and cosmological understanding within collective memory. By ritualizing the return of light, early humans created a tangible interface between the observable world, emotional experience, and symbolic representation, reinforcing both cognition and social cohesion. The psychological impact of light during the solstice cannot be understated. Humans are highly sensitive to illumination, even subtle changes in light influence mood, attention, and perception. The return of sunlight after the longest night produces a tangible sense of relief and optimism, signaling both environmental stability and the promise of life's continuity. These experiences were amplified in early communities, where social and ritualized observation created shared emotional resonance. By participating collectively in the recognition of light's return, humans reinforced psychological resilience, fostered anticipation, and cultivated a sense of belonging and continuity. Light thus functions as both a physical and emotional regulator, shaping cognition, mood, and communal experience. Light also facilitated imagination and symbolic interpretation. Shadows cast by fire or early sunlight could be dramatized, interpreted, or woven into stories, creating a bridge between perception and narrative. Humans began to associate patterns of illumination with meaning. The slow ascent of the sun mirrored the cycles of life, and the play of shadows suggested hidden forces or spiritual presence. The solstice, with its extremes of darkness and the gradual return of light, provided a particularly potent context for these interpretive practices. Light was not simply observed, it was read, performed, and integrated into a complex system of symbols that linked the natural world with human consciousness, emotional experience, and cultural expression. Communal recognition of light reinforced social cohesion and intergenerational transmission of knowledge. Solstice gatherings centered around fire or other forms of illumination provided opportunities to share observations, stories, and ritual practice. Elders could guide younger members in understanding patterns of light, the timing of seasonal shifts, and the symbolic significance of illumination. These practices ensured that both practical knowledge and cultural meaning were encoded within the community. The solstice became a recurring anchor, linking observation, ritual, and interpretation into a cohesive system that integrated survival, emotion, and symbolism. Light thus served as both a practical guide and a medium for embedding collective consciousness. The aesthetic dimensions of light further deepened its significance. Early humans responded not only to the presence of illumination but to its quality, the angle of the sun, the color of dawn, the flicker of flames, and the shifting geometry of shadows. These sensory experiences inspired reflection, storytelling, and symbolic interpretation. Observing and engaging with light encouraged attention, creativity, and emotional attunement, forming a bridge between perception and abstraction. The solstice amplified these effects, concentrating extremes of darkness and illumination into a compelling, immersive experience that fostered both cognition and emotional resonance. Humans learned to see light not only as a necessity for survival but as a carrier of aesthetic, symbolic, and philosophical meaning. Through repeated observation and ritual, humans developed temporal and symbolic literacy around light. They learned to anticipate cycles, interpret environmental cues, and align communal activity with the rhythms of the sun. The solstice, as a predictable inflection point, crystallized these capacities, enabling humans to integrate survival, emotion, and symbolism into a coherent understanding of cyclical change. Light became a teacher, guide, and mirror, reinforcing the interconnectedness of the natural world, human consciousness, and social cohesion. Its return after the longest night dramatized continuity, resilience, and renewal, embedding these principles deeply into the human experience. Ultimately, the significance of light during the solstice is multidimensional, encompassing practical survival, psychological resilience, ritual practice, symbolic interpretation, and aesthetic engagement. Humans experienced it as both a tangible and a metaphorical phenomenon, linking the observable environment with internal states, cultural meaning, and philosophical reflection. By observing, participating, and ritualizing the return of light, humans cultivated a sophisticated awareness of cyclical patterns, continuity, and the interplay between vulnerability and renewal. Light became both a physical and symbolic medium through which humans navigated existence, interpreted meaning, and embedded collective memory. The solstice thus offers a profound illustration of how humans transform natural phenomena into tools for cognition, emotion, and culture. Light, emerging gradually after the longest night, embodies continuity, hope, and resilience. It teaches attention, reflection, and the capacity to anticipate renewal. It fosters social cohesion through communal recognition and ritual. It inspires imagination, narrative, and symbolic thought. Through the solstice, early humans learned to inhabit darkness while anticipating illumination, to perceive vulnerability alongside hope, and to integrate observation, emotion, and meaning into a coherent understanding of life's cycles. In this way, light becomes both a practical guide and a profound symbol, linking survival, consciousness, and culture in a timeless reflection of human engagement with the world. The winter solstice, as the longest night of the year, has long served as a mirror in which humans have glimpsed their own vulnerability and potential for renewal. In the profound darkness, life is stripped to its essentials, warmth, sustenance, and the company of others. Yet even in this extreme, humans began to perceive patterns and meaning beyond immediate survival. The solstice became a temporal and symbolic threshold, a point at which the deepest darkness is directly linked with the inevitable return of light. In this interplay, humans discovered lessons about resilience, hope, and the interconnectedness of existence. The experience of the solstice is not only environmental but deeply psychological, offering a concentrated moment in which human consciousness engages with both fear and anticipation, mortality and possibility. In the longest night, humans confront extremes that sharpen both perception and imagination. The extended darkness intensifies awareness, heightening the senses and emphasizing vulnerability. Every sound, shadow, and movement carry significance, reinforcing attentiveness and survival skills. Simultaneously, this very extremity catalyzes reflection and imagination. The darkness becomes a canvas upon which humans project fears, hopes, and symbolic interpretations. Early humans, observing that the night eventually yields to light, began to associate periods of difficulty with the promise of transformation. The solstice, in this way, is both a physical and psychological pivot. The nadir of darkness simultaneously becomes the point of anticipation, reflection, and emerging possibility. Ritual played a central role in mediating these experiences. Fires, gatherings, songs, and dances transformed the longest night from a time of passive endurance into a space of active engagement. These practices served multiple purposes. They provided warmth and protection, reinforced communal bonds, and created a structured outlet for emotion and imagination. By participating in ritual, humans externalized internal tensions, dramatizing both fear and hope. The solstice, with its predictable timing and dramatic environmental conditions, provided a framework within which these rituals could acquire symbolic and emotional weight. Through repeated enactment, participants internalized lessons about cycles, endurance, and renewal, embedding them in both memory and culture. The solstice also illuminated the relationship between humans and the cosmos. Observing the sun's apparent pause and gradual return after the longest night provided early humans with a tangible experience of cyclical time. This observation was not merely practical, it carried symbolic resonance. The sun's rebirth became a metaphor for resilience, continuity, and the interdependence of life and cosmic order. Humans internalized this pattern, linking the external cycles of nature to their own inner rhythms, experiences, and aspirations. The solstice thus functions as a bridge between the observable world and the human capacity for reflection, imagination, and symbolic thought. Communal and social aspects of the solstice cannot be overstated. The longest night heightens vulnerability, making cooperation and shared attention critical. Gathering around fire, participating in ritual, and observing the return of light collectively strengthened bonds, reinforced social norms, and transmitted cultural knowledge. These communal experiences transformed the solstice into more than a seasonal event, it became a shared psychological and cultural milestone. Humans learned that survival, understanding, and resilience are enhanced through collective participation, and that communal observation amplifies the lessons embedded in natural cycles. The interplay of fear and hope during the solstice fosters a nuanced understanding of resilience. Darkness evokes uncertainty, scarcity, and mortality, but the anticipation of light provides reassurance and motivation. Humans begin to internalize the lesson that challenging periods are transient and that endurance is rewarded. This duality is dramatized and reinforced through ritual, storytelling, and observation of environmental patterns. By confronting extremes, humans cultivate psychological flexibility, patience, and foresight. The solstice becomes a concentrated lesson in navigating adversity, demonstrating that vulnerability and hope coexist, and that awareness of cycles empowers action and reflection. The symbolic significance of the solstice extends into early forms of cosmology and spirituality. The return of the sun after the longest night can be interpreted as a victory of life over darkness, order over chaos, or consciousness over uncertainty. By personifying or revering the sun, humans integrated observation into symbolic systems that guided behavior, reinforced values, and provided emotional sustenance. Ritual, myth, and storytelling around the solstice encode these principles, linking practical survival with moral and philosophical understanding. In this way, the solstice becomes a locus for the integration of environmental observation, emotional experience, and symbolic cognition. Environmental observation during the solstice further reinforces this integration. Early humans tracked the gradual return of light, the lengthening of days, and subtle seasonal cues in plants and animals. These observations informed practical actions such as hunting, gathering, and preparation, while simultaneously providing material for symbolic reflection. The solstice crystallizes the connection between human activity and environmental cycles, demonstrating that careful attention to natural patterns enhances both survival and comprehension of temporal rhythms. Humans learn to anticipate change, recognize continuity, and integrate cyclical understanding into daily life. The solstice also catalyzes imagination and storytelling. In the long darkness, the interplay of firelight, shadows, and ambient night shapes perception, inspiring narrative creation. Stories dramatize the tension between darkness and light, mortality and renewal, scarcity and abundance. They encode lessons about endurance, attention, and community, linking observation with ethical and philosophical reflection. Through narrative, humans transform environmental phenomena into cultural knowledge, integrating emotional, cognitive, and symbolic dimensions. The solstice thus becomes both a stage and a medium for cultivating imagination, moral reasoning, and collective identity. Psychologically, the solstice encourages reflection on mortality, limitation, and transformation. Humans are confronted with extremes, yet the predictable return of light demonstrates continuity and reliability. This pattern fosters hope, patience, and resilience, teaching that even the darkest periods are temporary and that preparation, observation, and cooperation facilitate survival and renewal. Early humans internalized these lessons through ritual, observation, and storytelling, creating a sophisticated interplay between experience, emotion, and symbolic understanding. The solstice becomes a concentrated, experiential teacher, reinforcing adaptive cognition and emotional regulation. The aesthetic dimension of the solstice also shapes perception and meaning. Light emerging after prolonged darkness, the subtle changes in landscape illumination, and the movement of shadows inspire contemplation, creativity, and symbolic interpretation. These experiences link sensory perception with emotional response and conceptual thought, forming a bridge between observation and abstraction. The solstice provides a recurring, immersive context in which humans explore these connections, integrating attention, reflection, and imagination into lived experience. Through repeated engagement, the solstice cultivates temporal literacy and cyclical awareness. Humans learn to anticipate environmental changes, recognize patterns, and situate individual and communal action within broader temporal rhythms. Ritual, observation, and narrative reinforce these lessons, embedding them in culture, memory, and consciousness. The solstice functions as both a practical and symbolic anchor, linking survival, cognition, social cohesion, and philosophical reflection. Ultimately, the solstice embodies the convergence of environmental observation, psychological insight, social practice, and symbolic meaning. It transforms the longest night into an occasion for reflection, ritual, and anticipation of renewal. Humans learn to navigate vulnerability, cultivate hope, and integrate personal and communal experience into an understanding of cyclical continuity. By engaging with the solstice, humans develop resilience, imagination, and a sophisticated awareness of their place within natural and cosmic rhythms. It is a moment where darkness and light intersect, where fear and hope coexist, and where observation, ritual, and reflection converge to shape consciousness, culture, and the enduring understanding of life's cycles. Human beings have always sought to anchor their understanding of existence in tangible patterns, and few natural phenomena offer as vivid a framework as the cycles of the sun. The winter solstice, with its extreme darkness and the promise of returning light, embodies both a practical and symbolic reference for navigating life, survival, and consciousness. Early humans, attuned to environmental rhythms, recognized the solstice as more than a calendrical point. It was a manifestation of continuity, a marker of resilience, and a mirror of internal and communal processes. This awareness shaped not only survival strategies but also the emergence of symbolic thought, ritual practice, and philosophical reflection. The solstice is a concentrated lesson in the alignment between human experience and the cycles of the natural world, providing insight into adaptation, meaning, and the evolution of consciousness. In practical terms, the solstice demanded attentiveness. The longest night brings with it scarcity, vulnerability, and the heightened risk of environmental hazards. Early humans relied on acute observation to navigate this extreme period. Tracking the movement of animals, monitoring weather changes, and managing food supplies were critical for survival. Yet these activities were inseparable from communal cooperation. Groups that shared observation, coordinated action, and supported each other through the long night were far more likely to endure. The solstice thus reinforced not only individual attentiveness but also the essential social interdependence required for survival in harsh conditions. Survival strategies became intertwined with observation of environmental patterns, forming a foundation for cultural and cognitive sophistication. Beyond practical concerns, the solstice was a powerful psychological catalyst. Darkness naturally evokes heightened awareness, fear, and reflection on mortality. Yet the gradual return of light after the solstice produces relief, hope, and emotional renewal. Early humans internalized this rhythm, perceiving the darkness as a transient state and the returning light as an affirmation of continuity. This observation fostered resilience, patience, and foresight. Humans began to link environmental patterns with internal emotional cycles, recognizing that adversity is temporary and that preparation, cooperation, and attentiveness facilitate successful navigation of challenges. The solstice thus functioned as both an environmental and psychological teacher, shaping human cognition and emotional regulation. Ritual practice amplified these lessons. Fires were tended, songs were sung, and communal gatherings were orchestrated to mark the passage of the longest night and the return of light. These rituals provided structure, reinforced social bonds, and externalized emotional states. Through embodied participation, humans internalized principles of resilience, continuity, and renewal. Firelight, shadows, and movement became symbolic tools, transforming physical experience into cognitive and emotional insight. The solstice was not simply observed, it was enacted, experienced, and integrated into collective memory, reinforcing both practical knowledge and cultural meaning. Symbolic interpretation of the solstice extended beyond survival. Humans began to see the return of light as a metaphor for life, consciousness, and transformation. Darkness represented vulnerability, limitation, and mortality, while illumination symbolized possibility, renewal, and continuity. By dramatizing this contrast through ritual, narrative, and observation, early humans created a framework for understanding cyclical change in both the environment and human experience. The solstice became a temporal and symbolic pivot, linking the physical rhythms of the world to psychological and cultural processes. Light was no longer simply a physical phenomenon, it became a language of hope, meaning, and transformation. Storytelling around the solstice reinforced this symbolic understanding. Tales embedded environmental knowledge, survival strategies, and philosophical reflection in memorable narratives. Heroes, ancestors, or deities often navigate periods of darkness only to return transformed, mirroring the sun's journey and the cycles of life. These stories served multiple functions. They educated, provided psychological reassurance, reinforced social cohesion, and offered a medium for abstract reflection. By participating in these narratives, humans internalized complex patterns of cause, effect, and meaning, linking observation with imagination, survival with reflection, and experience with symbolic understanding. The solstice also fostered temporal literacy and anticipatory cognition. By observing the sun's position, the length of days, and the gradual return of light, humans developed a sense of cyclical time and predictive reasoning. This awareness informed practical planning, such as the timing of hunts, food storage, and communal labor, while simultaneously supporting symbolic and philosophical understanding. The solstice, as a predictable event, became an anchor around which humans organized both action and meaning. Awareness of cycles enhanced adaptability, foresight, and cultural continuity, embedding environmental observation into the fabric of cognition, social practice, and emotional resilience. Communal engagement during the solstice strengthened social cohesion and collective memory. By gathering to observe, celebrate, and ritualize the transition from darkness to light, communities reinforced trust, interdependence, and shared knowledge. These practices ensured that both practical and symbolic lessons were transmitted across generations. Participation in solstice rituals became a medium through which environmental awareness, cultural values, and philosophical insights were embedded in collective consciousness. The solstice thus functions as a nexus of observation, ritual, cognition, and social cohesion, linking individual experience with community and natural order. The aesthetic and sensory dimensions of the solstice further enrich its significance. The quality of light at dawn, the subtle glow of fire, and the shifting shadows during the longest night create vivid, immersive experiences that engage attention, memory, and imagination. Humans respond not only to the presence of light but to its movement, color, and interplay with surrounding forms. These sensory experiences foster reflection, creativity, and symbolic interpretation. By attending to these phenomena, humans develop a nuanced awareness of environmental patterns and their emotional and philosophical implications. The solstice provides a concentrated context in which sensory perception, cognition, and symbolic meaning converge. Psychologically, the solstice teaches the coexistence of vulnerability and resilience. Darkness highlights fragility and uncertainty, while the return of light confirms continuity and possibility. This interplay fosters emotional regulation, patience, and anticipatory thinking. Humans learn that periods of difficulty are temporary, that attentive observation and preparation are essential, and that hope and renewal are inherent in natural cycles. These lessons are encoded through ritual, storytelling, and direct experience, reinforcing adaptive strategies and shaping consciousness. The solstice becomes a model for understanding impermanence, continuity, and the interplay of challenge and opportunity in human life. The solstice also encourages reflection on ethical and philosophical principles. Observing cycles of light and darkness, humans recognize the importance of alignment with natural rhythms, cooperation, and care for community and environment. Rituals and narratives embed these principles, creating a moral and symbolic framework for behavior. The return of light after darkness exemplifies the rewards of attentiveness, patience, and collective effort. By integrating observation, ritual, and reflection, humans develop a holistic understanding of life's interconnected cycles, linking individual action, communal well-being, and environmental awareness. Ultimately, the winter solstice embodies the convergence of practical, psychological, symbolic, and cultural dimensions of human experience. It transforms the longest night into an occasion for reflection, ritual, and anticipation, linking survival with symbolic meaning, observation with imagination, and individual experience with communal memory. Humans learn to navigate vulnerability while cultivating hope, to integrate perception with cognition and emotion, and to situate personal and collective experience within larger temporal and cosmic rhythms. The solstice is both a physical event and a profound symbol, illustrating the enduring interplay between darkness and light, challenge and renewal, observation and reflection, survival and meaning. It offers a concentrated lesson in resilience, continuity, and the human capacity to derive insight, connection, and purpose from the patterns of the natural world. The winter solstice is not merely an astronomical phenomenon, it is a crucible in which human consciousness, emotion, and culture converge. It represents the extreme of darkness, the height of vulnerability, and simultaneously the promise of light, continuity, and renewal. Early humans, living in close attunement with the rhythms of the natural world, understood the solstice as more than a point on the calendar. It was a living, palpable event that shaped thought, ritual, and perception. In observing the longest night and anticipating the gradual return of light, humans encountered lessons about resilience, patience, and the cyclical nature of existence. The solstice thus functions as a multidimensional teacher, providing both practical guidance for survival and profound symbolic insights into life, time, and consciousness. During the solstice, environmental extremes force heightened awareness. The long hours of darkness amplify the senses, making every movement, sound, and change in temperature significant. Early humans relied on acute observation to navigate this period of scarcity and risk. Tracking the behavior of animals, assessing weather patterns, and managing limited resources demanded both attentiveness and adaptability. Yet beyond these immediate survival requirements, the darkness also catalyzed introspection and imagination. Humans began to see patterns in the environment, projecting meaning onto natural cycles, and internalizing the notion that the return of light was inevitable. The solstice, therefore, functions as both a challenge and a teacher, offering practical lessons entwined with psychological and symbolic understanding. Ritual became a central vehicle for mediating the solstice experience. Fires were tended meticulously, songs and chants were performed, and communal gatherings structured human activity around the pivotal moment of darkness giving way to light. These rituals were more than practical, they were embodied expressions of understanding, enabling participants to engage both physically and psychologically with the cycle of decline and renewal. Firelight illuminated not only the surroundings but also human imagination, transforming the shadows and flickers into symbolic landscapes that dramatized the tension between darkness and illumination. In participating in these rituals, humans reinforced social cohesion, transmitted knowledge, and internalized principles of resilience and renewal. Light, emerging gradually after the longest night, acquired deep symbolic significance. Darkness was associated with vulnerability, scarcity, and mortality, while the return of illumination represented continuity, hope, and transformation. Observing this pattern created a cognitive and emotional framework for understanding cyclical change, both externally in the environment and internally within human experience. Early humans connected these observations to ritual and storytelling, creating narratives that dramatized the tension between adversity and renewal. In this way, the solstice became a bridge between practical survival, emotional processing, and symbolic cognition, linking observation of the natural world with imaginative and reflective thought. Narrative and myth further amplified the solstice's significance. Stories told during this time often featured themes of death and rebirth, darkness and light, and endurance through adversity. Heroes, ancestors, or deities might descend into darkness only to emerge transformed, mirroring the sun's own journey and the natural cycles observed in plants, animals, and seasons. These narratives served multiple functions. They encoded survival knowledge, reinforced communal values, and provided psychological reassurance. By engaging with these stories, humans learned to interpret environmental patterns, regulate emotion, and integrate experience into a broader, symbolic framework. The solstice thus became a focal point for transmitting culture, knowledge, and insight across generations. The cyclical nature of the solstice also nurtured a sophisticated temporal awareness. By observing the length of days, the sun's trajectory, and the gradual return of light, humans developed an understanding of time that transcended immediate experience. This awareness informed practical action, such as timing hunts, preparing food stores, and scheduling communal activities, while also supporting symbolic and philosophical reflection. The solstice, as a predictable and observable event, anchored these temporal patterns, providing both a physical and symbolic reference point for aligning human activity with the rhythms of the natural world. Awareness of cycles cultivated foresight, patience, and an appreciation for the continuity of life, even amidst periods of apparent scarcity and vulnerability.